So I will share my screen. I hope to the right. Yeah. So you now should see my screen, I hope. Okay, so welcome everyone for this Plenary 2. I will give you a few words on that. My name is Johannes Karstensen. I'm together with Jay Perlman, the co-chair of the Ocean Best Practices System Steering Group. And what I would like to share with you first is a short glimpse into the agenda. We had last night already our first Plenary 2 meeting, more for the Pacific people in this meeting. And now we come to the Atlantic. And what we will do is to go now through different stages here of the agenda, working up, so to say, the week. This week was actually started last Friday in for Europeans night session, evening session. And it is quite important for all of you to understand that this is really the progress of the Ocean Best Practices system, which is also a system that's only targeted to you, right? It is a system that really is made for services for the community, and the community are all of you. And I think we saw over the week from the many very, very active working groups that there is a high level of identification that's going on between Ocean Best Practices and the Ocean Best Practices system and all these different activities that were in the room. So now what we would like to do with this panel here, or with this second panel, is to understand and to hear from you how we can improve our services, how we can improve Ocean Best Practices, the Ocean Best Practices system. So what are actually the key messages that are rising out of these different themes and patterns and synergies you were noticing in the workshop from your working groups is our key question actually that will guide Ocean Best Practices system for the next implementation phase. So after this little introduction here, then we go over into the session 1 and 2, which have in this Atlantic case, a short break only of 5 minutes between the two. And in these sessions, there will be primarily the report from the different working groups, the 11 working groups we had. After that, we will go into breakout discussions among participants. You will be just directed into these breakout groups from Ben. That will be a random participation. And these groups are actually made to really discuss among each other. And then we will do some little called Codigital exercise, which then really is prioritizing certain things. Just what comes into your mind will be asked then from you. And then what further goes on is then a synthesis discussion, which is then 45 minutes. That's now led by Mark Bushnell. And this synthesis discussion will end with another interactive activity, which is a Jamboard, and Ben will introduce you to that. Then comes a session which really is then the plenary recommendations, and Anya Waite will moderate that session, and some closing remarks will be at the end. So just to recall to you, we really had a very, very large presentation from all around the world that really participated in this workshop, which I think is a great achievement also thanks to COVID actually, because we had to move to this digital meeting here, and that opens this type of opportunities up. And this was from the first plenary, a nice screenshot. I hope we can have another screenshot this time, and I'm hand now over, or close here and hand over to Cora Hoerstmann, who will moderate the next session. Thank you.
Before we jump into that, if I could just ask people once again, if you're a senior or experienced member of the OBPS community, can you please add an asterisk to the front of your name, as you see that Johannes has done? And that way, when we go into the breakouts, we will be able to distribute you among all the different groups. Yeah. Thanks. Over to you, Cora.
Thanks, Ben and Johannes. I'm Cora Hoerstmann. I'm the early career for the Ocean Best Practice Workshop Organization team. And it's my pleasure to moderate the first part of the working group reports tonight or today. And I will, with this, hand over back to you, Johannes, for the working group report of convergence and endorsement of best practices.
True. So I'm on again. So this time I'm reporting here on the working group convergence and endorsement, and Juliet Hermes and Rebecca Zitoun were both my co-leads on that. So, oops, okay. Sorry, now I'm back. So we had 5 meetings in that with that working group. Typically, we had about 30 people participating from all over the world, actually. And the topic was really what ways actually, let's see, I have to see if that's, yeah. That's what I thought. Okay, so it was really to understand from implementers of global, regional, and organizational ocean observation programs, projects, coordination efforts, to learn what their successes and challenges are in the process of converging documents into standard operation procedures or best practices, and also what their expectations are on endorsing, so really labeling best practices to be the ones that are the accepted, recommended, and accepted best practices for a certain group are. So in other words, what we would like to understand from this workshop was to identify the motivations to create and review these best practices, standard operation procedures, to identify the framework and the approaches that are taken and needed to develop and synthesize documents into this more globally accepted documents like SOPs and BPs. Understand also the possibilities of converging documents and how this is important. OBPS, the Ocean Best Practices System, can support that process. Identify the need for endorsement. So really, when is it needed that a certain group says, well, this is now our recommended best practices compared to other best practices. And then ways on how communicating that there are these best practices and that communities should follow, or these are the recommended way to proceed. Identify the bottlenecks, of course, in the convergence process and the needs for the community. So the summary of these discussions we had was that best practices, that's important, does not necessarily mean highest accuracy. It just means, what means just? Known accuracy. And the working group on quantity uncertainty quantification had a whole working group on that. Convergence, we also realized that is always linked to communities, and that doesn't need to be global, but it could be smaller communities that are exactly of the same value. We came also to the conclusion that best practices and standard operation procedures that make use of certified reference material, which in certain ways is a global approach, are to be highlighted, because this way is really something that helps to get objective uncertainty estimates. Best practices should be as comprehensive as they need to be. So it's not always the best to have a best practice that covers everything, but it could be just for the purpose. So it needs to be fit for purpose. What is also important for the uptake of best practices by communities is that there's a creation of an ownership and trust into these documents. So this is also not trivial and needs some support that can also be given by OBPS at the end. The uptake, the review process is of course key. because they are only best practices. So there's always an improvement required if new technology comes into play. So questions are how often, who is responsible, and yeah, how to organize that. Best practices should also include worst practices. Lessons learned is something that came out. Bottlenecks in the convergence process. Best practices, creation of these convergence always needs champions. How to motivate people to be a champion for creating and guiding the process of this conversion. Then, of course, this comes with it, assembling the working groups, reaching consensus, and being unaware of ocean best practices system are bottlenecks. So review, update of best practices need also permanent contacts, and for example, collaboration with global systems like Goose could help here. So what ocean best practices help and support can help in this process of the convergence. Highlight use of certified reference material in the docs helps continue advertise OBPS and a lot of more. Then next step is to really understand how the linkage is between what we found and the other working groups. And then we have a lot of open questions. These open questions can only be answered when you provide us input as the whole group. And the way moving forward is really to keep the Slack space open for discussion information, provide also contact point for an interested community, consider formation of action groups, and engage people. For example, nominate ocean best practice system ambassadors, supporters. So all this information will be taken to the next OBPS meeting, which is in a couple of weeks. And then we will assign priorities. Thank you.
Thank you, Johannes. I think especially with the worst practices, we had a lot of fun already during this workshop thinking about it. I just want to make everyone aware who is presenting that if you're not sharing yourself, that you can contact Nenad and he will help you with it. And also that we are really strict on the 7 minutes. So in case you run over time, you will hear a bell. So you will hear a bell 2 minutes before the end and also 30 seconds before. And then we will kindly invite you to find the end of your presentation. And with that, I would like to invite Johanna Diva for developing training and guidance for the next presentation.
Yes, hello. Okay, good morning, good evening, good day to all of you. Nenad, can you run my PowerPoint for me? Thank you. So on behalf of our colleagues, Peter Petersons, Sherry Swartz, and Abby Alela, I'll report on the summary of our working group on developing training and guidance materials. Next, please. We welcomed, next slide, please. Yes, so we welcomed some 30 participants in the 3 sessions that we had on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday. And guided by the scope of the discussion, our group addressed the following questions. In the interest of time, let me briefly go through the highlights of our discussion. Next slide, please. On question number 1, our group noted the following training programs related to ocean best practices, the Ocean Teacher Global Academy, POGO fellowships, technician training of UNOLS. We have the MAID internship program, biogeochemical sensor training course, and the International Tsunami Information Center. A reference was also made to an online survey that attempted to map existing OBPS related training and capacity development programs around the world. Looking at EOVs, the courses focus mainly on subsurface temperature, subsurface salinity, phytoplankton mass and diversity, oxygen, etc. Next, please. The group also noted the following as target users: of OBPS training, mainly students, educators, ocean professionals, ECOPs, government officials, disaster management authorities, industry, local communities, technicians, and others. And in addition, it was felt that also regional information centers, those regional alliances, IODE, Ocean Info Hub, Atlantois, ODIP, and should be considered as target audiences. Next, please. As for the third question, hello. Okay. So as for the third question on capacity methodologies, capacity development methodologies, there was an overwhelming preference for online learning, probably caused by the COVID-19 situation, as they can reach large audiences across geographic boundaries. The group noted, however, that for topics that require hands-on laboratory or technical work, a fully online approach will not work. Especially hands-on experience on board the research vessel is essential and is not easily replaced. However, in this regard, the use of virtual reality was also mentioned. It was concluded that a variety of methodologies needs to be considered depending on the subject and expected results of the training. There should be some best practice development on how to be successful online, and might also be an option to do an online course with theory background and then one-on-one coaching sessions, and then pilot these types of coaching sessions and provide funding to purchase equipment. OTGA was also cited as an example of a model that can be used for online training in a formal course. Next, please. MOOCs, supported by a suite of resources, mentoring and peer-to-peer learning were also mentioned as relevant methodologies. Courses need to be provided in languages relevant to the target audience. Face-to-face courses are limited to few participants and relatively expensive, as noted. And internships in labs and fieldwork are very important and should also be encouraged. Next, please. On question 4 regarding existing tools, resources, or platforms, there's mention of infographics, videos, manuals, toolkits, handbooks, games, and was also noted that various monitoring networks have also established best practices. It was noted that OBPS could contribute to the development of toolkits, and it was also recommended to consider ethics courses in OBPS. It was also recommended to the steering group of the OBPS to consider the issue how to review and recognize quality of courses developed by a wide range of entities. In this regard, the group was informed that the IOC project office for IODE is ISO certified as learning service provider and applies a well-defined set of protocols to plan, deliver, and evaluate its courses. Next, please. We also crowdsource best practices in e-learning, underlining that training offering needs to be more than just lectures. There has to be pre-course involvement and post-course communication and assessments, assignments, certificates, practical projects, and the end of the learning experience. In this regard, the importance of Ocean Expert was also mentioned as a tool to keep track of experts as lecturers or students. Next, the provision of equipment and maintenance and regular follow-up training was also noted as important. In this regard, BPs are not static and will change with time, and trainees should be informed about these changes and should provide a story trail of course evolution. Next, please. Now, effective practices shared include the cheat sheets for each EOV. This would highlight basics of measurement technique, quality control, and would be easily distributed and low cost. And the decision tree or flow chart that can help by laying out different methods and how the data that comes from it could mean or be applied. Next slide, please. The discussion also delved into how non-scientific communities and practitioners get engaged in the creation, adoption, and routine employment of best practices. There's mention of citizen science initiatives, innovative creative ways of getting involved in ocean science for young people, involving scientific NGOs in scientific societies, community engagements, and co-designing some best practices with policymakers. Next slide, please. An important hurdle to involving the non-scientific community is access to the technology and access to data and information. And let me just go ahead with the next slide as well, just to highlight the challenges and the pitfalls. So challenges include sustainability and funding, agreement and consensus, and the under-resources, in the fact that many developing nations and ECOPs don't have the resources required. Next slide, please. For the pitfalls, we need to be careful not to force VPs, as they may be insensitive to local conditions, and that people can become very overwhelmed. Let me just show the next slide, the last slide, for the action items that were identified by the working group. So that's creating toolkit, including model data sets for each EOD and decision trees. Does that mean I still have 30 seconds?
No.
No.
That's time's up. All right then. So let me just leave this action items in place in here, and the last slide for the action items for recommendation to the OBPS group. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Johanna. There was a lot in your working group outcomes, and I think a lot of overlaps with other groups' recommendations. Very nice. And with that, I would like to.
We can discuss it later, yeah, during the open session. Thank you.
I would like to invite Andrea McCurdy from Ocean Partnership Building.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this this next plenary. I want to start. Let's see, are my slides? They should be there.
Give us a minute.
Okay.
Partnership, Nanad. Yeah, and can everyone please let Nanad know in advance if you want us to share your slides. You're welcome to share them yourselves, but if not, let him know so he's ready.
Well, I can start. Basically, the first slide lists the various leads, co-leads, and our expert panel that we convened to discuss the development of partnerships. And in essence, what I want to say about that is, rather than kind of go down the list, is that I just want to thank everyone for their profound contribution and energy in putting together this session. Is that we asked for a good deal of expertise and comment over the course of the week. And so I can share my slides. Do you want me to just do it from here?
If you like, I have it ready to go now. It's just
okay.
a second.
I'm sharing, but it's slow.
But if you're ready to go, Andrea, maybe just do it.
I'm sharing it now. Is this the right one?
We don't see it yet.
Wait a moment.
I have it.
Well, anyway, so what we convened to discuss is, so if we can go to the next slide, please. And now the next slide. And then there, I think I'm ready to talk to this one. Okay, perfect. So basically what we convened to discuss is the idea of a collective impact organization, which is sort of it's a model that's been used to bring together groups addressing large societal issues and has been determined to be effective when certain conditions are in place. And so this was brought up at first at the community white paper offered by Weller et al. At the Ocean OBS conference. It was then discussed at an OBS 19 workshop session led by Consortium for Ocean Leadership. It was then discussed during a session at the Regional Coordination Network meeting and the Ocean Sciences meeting 2020 while in San Diego. This concept was also discussed and endorsed by Goose last week in a meeting convened by the National Academy's Ocean Studies Board and they will have a report to follow in 2021, which might have further guidance beyond what our working group came up with. Next slide, please. Okay, so in essence, what we looked at over the course of the last week are the 5 elements of a collective impact organization. They all seem pretty simple, but having been a project manager, you really need to have all 5 of them in place in order to really sort of be clicking along in unison. And that's the thing, is that the 5 elements need to be in place. And so you need, of course, a common agenda. But this, while it may sound like it makes common sense, it's essential, and it's exercise that needs to be gone through. Because in the process of going through it, you'll realize who among your collaborative groups may have varying objectives or goals. And so you need to come up with a way to A, understand those, and then B, facilitate them while underway. The shared measurements, this of course was not necessarily always thought about, but our experts agreed that it should be a part of any collaboration and from the beginning, and it should include both qualitative and quantitative evaluations. Third, as required, is a mutually reinforcing activities. And what is meant here is that not just everybody doing the same thing together, but everybody coming together with the things that are their expertise and that they are especially good at, or in the area that they are used to working in. And our experts cautioned that it might take management and a little bit of finesse to, because science is such a competitive field, to avoid competition and to make sure that events and things are scheduled as to avoid that. On the positive side, this type of coordination might also reduce the duplication of efforts, or reduce the duplication of competing for efforts within regions and organizations, as we know how expensive and labor intensive it is to propose for money. Fourth is the continuous communication. Don't need to tell anybody more about that, but it is a cornerstone element. And it's also important to seek a balance. I mean, if you have a group that likes to talk informally, that's lovely, but there also needs to be some formalized reporting and communication, and you need to find that sweet spot or that balance without becoming too bureaucratic, but make sure that everyone is informed and that all processes are deemed as transparent. A backbone support, absolutely necessarily and ideally would come from a group that operates independent from what the collaboration is achieving. Of course, this will require resources, and of course, these resources are often lacking, and sometimes this failure to secure these resources results in the failure of otherwise really good projects. Next slide, please. So now I'd like to turn to key recommendations. We had a couple slides here worth. The panel of experts wanted to change the title from partnerships to collaborations, as they felt partnerships was too strong a word for often what comes together in these endeavors. They also recommend that this best practices framework be further explored, and that a collaborative organization model with all 5 elements might be as critical, is probably worth further exploration. There's also within the literature for this model 3 phases and associated factors for success. We did not vet these, but we would recommend further vetting in order to accompany sufficiently this, this model. And that there are indeed, if we want use cases further developed, there are indeed organizations out there that are very successful who you could demonstrate that the existence of these 5 elements within their working day-to-day organization create success. I'm sorry, the chat coming up is very distracting. Next slide, please. Okay, and so finally, last set of recommendations is that they did also seek to maybe potentially explore this as this work be developed into a manager's guide or a workbook that for people who are undergoing building collaborations to undertake. This could be especially important as we move into the UN decade, where groups are going to be coming together for the first time, and this might be a way to help strengthen the potential success of said. And again, as part of the IOC and sort of within the family of Goose, that maybe if OBPS could help endorse at least some of this work or model to promote the coming together of groups would be potentially very helpful over the short term. And we also finally during this session explored the possible solutions to broader impacts. And so we looked at growth for blue economies, and that case study had its own within it 4 recommendations, and those were, of course, setting common expectations, closing communication gaps, building trust, and building relationships built on an appropriate timeline. The point there being that often groups come in, they get all excited to do something about the blue economy, but they don't sufficiently bring everyone and their specific needs and concerns under the tent. So that's it for me.
Thank you very much, Andrea. That was perfect in time. I would like to invite Michelle Babier from the ethics group for their report.
Okay, thank you. So I share my screen. Okay, here we are. Okay. Okay, so I would like to thank the OBPS organizing team for inviting me to talk about ethics and to have several sessions on ethics. So as we are starting from scratch, I will just remind you that you are all using technologies. Technology has no ethics, but we do have. And ethics is about humans, so it's the respect for human freedom, dignity, equality, equality and citizen rights. And what I try to develop within the ocean observing community is applied ethics, which defines how to implement these principles and core values related to the ocean observation in your practices. And applied ethics provide the guidance, and the idea is to ensure no negative long-term global impact, taking into account all different things, the legislation, the economy, the politics, the culture, and its guiding principles to address past power imbalances, because in the back of the slides, you can see this map of the world by anamorphosis, and it's related to the domestic growth product, and we can see a huge difference between the northern countries and southern countries. And the thing is that ocean observers should feel responsible. So we had different sessions. So one session was dedicated on indigenous knowledge, and the main recommendation is that when you want to collaborate, you need to have this co-design approach to respect the cultural differences, which can be very important. To know about the OCAP principle, you know, this ownership, control, access, and possession principles to reach agreements, because the idea is to have permission. Some countries or some communities want to protect their knowledge. So it's important to respect this aspect. We also had another session dedicated to collaboration with fishermen, and I really like the slides that Andrea show about these 5 elements. So it's clear to adopt a transparent approach, you know, to address internal conflict, to survey this transparency, to evaluate the management, and most of all, to provide feedback to the people with whom you are working with. It's really important. We do it in the scientific world, but we do not take care enough when collaborating with humans. So we also had a session on sharing infrastructure, because we have 2 kinds of observation. One is the long-term coordinated international sustained effort, like GOOS, or we can have some really short-term one-off project which correspond to a punctual observing. And we need both in order to have this knowledge of the ocean. So it's important that this punctual observing can share the infrastructure, because they could generate much more diverse and useful information if they are systematically shared. And also we have a responsibility to change our culture to better use this publicly funded infrastructure and really make the effort to look for what does exist on the field and which sensor or how could we accommodate or integrate new sensors in our infrastructures. So some other tips. When you are facing an ethical issue, maybe sometimes the first thing is to look at the legislation. You know, you have the UNCLOS, you have the Nagoya Protocol, you have different legislation, and you need to pay attention to the national legislation. And when you are facing also, another tip is when you are facing an ethical issue, think about the long-term impact, either positive or negative. This would help you to take a decision. And this can happen when you are thinking, should I use data from oil drilling, well hunts, or unethical experiments? So really try to think about the context and the long-term impact, because ethics recommendation, you can have big guidelines, but it's always a case-by-case approach, because you always have different culture, different conditions, different observations. So it's kind of difficult to provide one best practice. However, so this is why the first recommendation is to design a flow chart that would that you could consult to identify what are the potential issues related to your research and to have the related ethical recommendation. So I started to draft this kind of flow chart. So the idea is really to have clear questions, so have 8 sections: access to data, collaboration with third country, human participation, environment, animals, misuse and bad use. And the idea is, for example, do you plan to engage collaboration with indigenous communities? Please specify that this should be done at the outset of the project and think about co-design and participatory project. Specify that you need to reach agreement with the community. Be aware of the OBPS principles. Be aware that some communities have ethics committees to ensure the protection of their knowledge. So like this, I started to draft several points. For example, if you want to collaborate with fishers, does your research involve non-scientific communities? So what type of local resource information will be used? How many exactly? How will you recruit them? If you conduct interviews, what is the process? You need to consider the inclusion and exclusion criteria. You need also to obtain the consent of these people to participate on their research. And these people can withdraw their participation at any time. So you have to, so I have drafted this slide, so you are very welcome to come and to have a look and to help me to draft it. The second thing would be to have some help to support the implementation of an ethics committee in the ocean observing community. And this could be linked to the UN Decade, because we need to have in the UN Decade an ethical framework. So maybe OBPS can help to do this. We want also maybe to design a statement for ocean observers. And this could be available on the OBPS website. And again, it is the same. It's about working with the goal of global benefits for you and your partners, and look for their own interests. You need to share data, but respect regional, national decisions to minimize impact from research and monitoring on ocean ecosystems. So like this, a statement would be a 1 page long, so it's not a big deal to do. And also organize online courses on applied ethics that is specifically dedicated to ocean observation, because usually students have ethics courses related to research integrity. But in the ocean observation field, we have many recommendations that can be provided to the student. And finally, what I was thinking is to open a clearinghouse where you could find the non-scientific information. This could be 1 page on the OBPS website, where you have all the legal aspects, specific agreement, permission needed. And this is what is done at the CBD for the Nagoya Protocol. You have this map of the world, and you just have to tick on the country. Yes.
Can you come to your last sentence? It's really exciting, but okay. We have to save time.
Okay, so just if you click here, you have all the legislative links that can be used. Okay, so these are the idea, and just to finalize, we just we call for contribution for a special issue on ocean science and ethics in frontiers. This could be a way also to share your ethical point of view. I'm done, sorry.
Thank you very much. That was also a lot of input from your side. That is really great to see. And I'm sorry that I had to interrupt you.
Sorry.
It's my pleasure to invite Mark Bushnell from Ocean Uncertainty Quantification for their report.
Mm. And this is not it.
I've got it ready, Mark, if it's the one.
I'm embarrassed. I thought I could do this. Yes, please, Ben. Doggone it.
No problem.
I've only practiced 18 times.
Well, let's just make sure this is the right one.
That looks right.
It said final.
Yeah, I put that on about a week ago.
Okay.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mark Bushnell, and I'm going to be reporting on this working group for ocean uncertainty quantification. And I want to start out by thanking the co-leads. We really had a super team, 5 of us, so the workload was shared. Not a huge lift for any one of us. Just a real honor for me to work with these folks. You heard Johannes at the start of this plenary say that the Ocean Best Practice System is a service for our community, and we 5 took advantage of that to get together and discuss ocean uncertainty quantification. So that's how Ocean Best Practices system is working for us. We 5 came up with a list of our individual goals, and it was about 3 times as long as this. We distilled it down to these, but for the most part, it's just to get a conversation going about uncertainty quantification. It is universally agreed that it is ill addressed across our community. A lot of people think that just precision or accuracy of the instrument is sufficient, and it doesn't begin to approach. It's necessary, but not sufficient. There are at least a dozen considerations that are often overlooked. Things like conveying the ocean uncertainty value of a measurement effectively, so that it's not misused by people who either intentionally or unintentionally may want to twist the uncertainty to their own understanding. Next slide. And so we had 12 presentations over the course of 4 sessions. It was a total of 6 hours, and uncertainty spans the breadth of variables and the entire value chain that Ocean Best Practice System also refers to. It begins with a desire for a specified uncertainty and the design of an instrument to meet that uncertainty, the design of the observing system, the collection of the measurements, and the creation of products and the delivery of them to someone, and all along the way, uncertainty should be figured. So here we see at least 3 different regions that we discussed in the measurements, in the overarching concepts, and in gridded products. These are the titles of our papers, and it's kind of hard to see, but there are some words in bold that just help show the breadth and depth of uncertainty. Next slide. So these are some of the discussion outcomes we had, and the first is that despite documents that clearly define the terminology, in practice the use of terms is highly variable. and inconsistent. One of the interesting statements came from a metrologist in our group who said that we should not get wrapped around the words. It's the intent of the ocean uncertainty value and the conveyance of that to users. That's what matters. And so rather than one word that means something very specific, a paragraph defining what it is you're presenting to them as an uncertainty measurement might be of value. Next slide, please. So our working group overlapped with several others. The convergence of methods. We realized that an uncertainty focused approach towards SOPs would probably be a good idea. And again, because uncertainty quantification is so rarely addressed, we can converge ideas and come up with an SOP rather than trying to take practices that already exist and trying to arrange for compromise. That's a lot more challenging. We overlapped with the data and information management. The conveyance of an uncertainty value goes along with the metadata, just like everything else. We talked about how quality flags, they're simple by design, but if you have a quality flag and an uncertainty value, users of that data have a lot more information. It magnifies the value. And then the training and guidance aspects of it, that's one of the key components of another group, the US CLIVAR Ocean Uncertainty Quantification effort, is to just get people to start including this in their thoughts. Next slide. So recommendations from our 12 presentations span the gamut from recommendations specific to a technology such as HF radar to a more general uncertainty quantification effort across many variables. And then some that were very specific from the UQ working group to ocean best practice system, and here they are. It was going into this, I was quite certain that US CLIVAR and Ocean Best Practice System had a lot in common. And so there will be coordination and collaboration between these two organizations. The Southern Ocean Observing System is working to develop tools for uncertainty quantification. So they're a partner and they can help us build the tools under the umbrella of the Ocean Best Practice System. And so on. There's we want to expand the use of uncertainty and the simple requirements for UQ and oceanography best practice, and so on. So these are the 5 recommendations that we submit to the Ocean Best Practice System. Next slide. And so I want to thank all of our speakers. Every one of them was happy to attend. They uploaded their presentations on time. They stuck to their time limits. And then after every one of them, we had a great discussion. I appreciate that. And so one more slide that's got nothing to do with this is the call for everyone here. Do it right now. Subscribe to the Ocean Best Practice newsletter. I've been asked to do this plug for them. It's not a hard thing to remember. Newsletter at oceanbestpractice.org. Comes out monthly. A lot of good information in it. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark. That was perfect in time, and a good end with a newsletter for a 5-minute break where you can start fighting the sun. And after the break, I will hand over to Rebecca Zitoun, which will do the second part of the workshop report moderation.
Yeah. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Ben, for this amazing music. Again, I just want to remind you that we want to stick to the time limit, which is 7 minutes. And after the presentations, we do a Mentimeter poll just to have a bit more interaction. So we will start with data and information management, and Pierluigi will present that one.
Yes, I will. Thank you. I will share my screen in a moment. So then no need to worry. Or maybe worry just slightly. Do you see my screen at the moment?
Not yet, no.
Not yet? All right, then, just a moment. You should see it now.
Yes, we do.
Great, wonderful. All right, so thank you very much for the opportunity. I'm going to report on the output of our group, which was quite a large group, lots of very interesting inputs. Myself and my early career co-lead, Cem, put together this presentation based on the input of that group. Quite good global coverage too, we're very happy about that. And there's a table of affiliations and people inside our working group report, as you all of your working groups have one. And we'll be developing that report in the next few days to summarize some 45 pages of contributions that we've amassed over the week. The great vision of the opportunity is this idea of digitizing best practices, moving our narrative documents that are giving guidance into something that machines can also act on to help humans reach convergence, as was discussed by Johannes and others. And this is a very exciting thing because this allows us to better bridge to the world of data information and digital knowledge that initiatives like the Ocean Data Information System and Ocean Info Hub from UNESCO will be trying to bridge globally. There are a couple of links that will show up in the chat, dropped in there by Jem in a moment for more information on those initiatives to do that. This has already impacted the way that we suggest best practice documents or methodological documents at large are written. Indeed, there is a recommendation on how to write best practices, and it includes some notes on templates and formatting, which seem quite humble, but they may have a massive impact in terms of linking what you write to digital streams of data, information, and knowledge. So it's an ongoing synthesis. That working group report is coming out of our session notes. And we did a co-development and also a co-prioritization where the working group participants highlighted and color-coded what they'd considered the most important things to convey in this presentation. And that's what I will do now. There were also some good debates in our Slack space, which are continuing, and we encourage to continue after the workshop too. Right, so our alpha version of recommendations for the Ocean Best Practice System are as follows. Some of them are connected to the place of the OBPS in the emerging digital ocean ecosystem. What does that mean? Well, we have a lot of content to share and interface with digital solutions, and our early career ocean professionals who are at the front lines of a lot of this innovation distilled a few core recommendations out there. One of them, and indeed it's not just relevant for early career folks, but perhaps more so, there's a reluctance to share data and methods about data because you're not rewarded for doing so. It takes a lot of time, and in fact, it might disadvantage you. So that's something that needs to be thought about, and the OBPS can help that by exposing it through its systems and its DOI systems and linking that with metrics. There would be a focus on managing the human element of digital stewardship, and again, that's the training part of it. So the role of the OBPS in training is central there. Of course, the automation and technology behind the OBPS can also help to get the delayed mode data that sits around for a few years more rapidly into real-time data streams so that you can do new science. And for early careers in particular, 2 years can mean a lot in terms of their career. That's when projects conclude. So other questions, how should we actually link these narrative objects to all of the data and information out there? And I won't go through the points exactly, you can look for keywords there, but the main idea is that continued digitization, that continued training of people who can actually pioneer the linkage of parts of methods, keywords, semantically tagged content into their code bases and link the version control. So the code and the method can develop side by side and detect one another through our technologies. Also to consider is how do we actually bridge the people who are the digerati, the ultra technical community, with people from policy development and decision makers who are aware of the importance of data, but may not know the consequences of the decisions being made as this field is developing so quickly. So how can the OBPS help that? Well, elevate and highlight calls for and content that can help those bridge builders form a new kind of interface field and support those folks in continuing their efforts there. Right. One of those roles is also providing methods or highlighting methods submitted by the community to bring the data people closer to the decision makers and vice versa. So ultimately, they become the same kind of person or at least there are interface people available. Right. How do we best integrate code archives and automated workflows? The future is automated. There will be quite a lot of that. And so the idea of making sure, again, that the OBPS can react to machine-written and readable code and methodologies is something that was highlighted. But as things become more automated, we still have to then encode, linking to the ethics group, protections for intellectual property and rights and ownerships of the content, especially with groups who are particularly interested in safeguarding that information. So a digital method to control that is just as important. We also had a little scoping session of what's not on our radar, but will be in the next 5 to 10 years. So defenses for fake data and also fake methods is something that we must also consider. Lots of things can happen, the systems can be gained, etc. So there's quite a lot to worry about there. We do want to build more links to the ethics working group or the ethics community to help with that, because indeed data is being linked much more to political decisions, data sovereignty, data localization, and there needs to be some guidance there. Second part, how do we align digital strategies and best practices? Well, very simply, there are lots of strategies out there, and the OBPS's technology to help communities developing strategies come together and merge them so that things don't bifurcate is the main message here. There are points to be emphasized in strategy development, best practices for developing digital strategies that should be perhaps propagated through the field, such as sustainability plans and the prevention of silos from the onset of a design. Again, the machine readability of the documents, it always comes back to that, will facilitate this convergence. Then we had a very interesting conversation on what the data information and knowledge flow looks like and what it could mean. So in a sense, we encourage the OBPS to elevate content which helps us understand what a knowledge-driven approach is, what society needs knowledge. We need to get data to support information development for that knowledge, versus simply throwing data at things and hoping it works. So there are different stakeholders that have valuable input along that chain, and to sort of give structure to this conversation in our control of methodological documents and technologies. That's a very interesting conversation. It's continuing, and I encourage you to take a peek in our working group report, and please contribute if you have comments or challenges therein. So thank you very much. And special thanks to my colleague, Jem, who was heroic efforts to control the information flows coming into that. Thank you.
Thank you, Pierre. That was a really nice summary with a lot of good insights. Thank you for staying in time as well. And we just keep on going to the fisheries working group, and Peter will present this one. So I open the floor to Peter.
Thank you very much. And I will try to share my screen. Let's see. Let's see. Can you see it now and hear me?
Yes.
All right, thank you. So we had more than 40 participants in this working group, and I'd like to thank my co-chairs for helping setting us up. In fact, I'd like to thank the Ocean Best Practices leadership for inviting to run a fisheries working group. I think that was quite appropriate and interesting experience. So we had 4x2 sessions, and we had a series of very excellent speakers to introduce the various topics. We broke it down into data collection, stock assessment, and management advice, which was kind of a decision we made in advance, but that seemed to work, although fisheries is very strongly connected from the top to the bottom here. So why are we doing this, and what are we hoping to achieve with best practice? There's a lot of best practice out there in fisheries, but in this context, we're trying to connect with all of you others. So helping people getting things done in a good way, make the right decisions, but also not becoming a limitation. We need to improve continuously and challenge conventional thinking, converge the methods, and then standardization and quality assurance. We have to recognize that probably in other fields, but certainly in fisheries, both requirements and capabilities vary strongly regionally, and there's a different focus in different areas. So we have regionally within fisheries significant progress in specific topic areas, and locally they can be highly advanced, focusing on what is to be done and how does that work, and there's a lot of societal interest in it. Globally, when we talk about fisheries management and fisheries as a whole, and this thing about best practice is really aspirational. Where do we want to go with this? So some of the messages from the data collection discussion. We have very many different methods to work towards stitching together different measurements and estimates. And I don't read out here, but you see we also note various links to other aspects that we didn't cover in particular in our working group. Then we go all the way from metadata, which are quite important and also important to share, not always shared, to big data. A lot of data is being collected. Think about acoustic fisheries data, which are really exploding. And how do we deal with those? How do we manage those data as we go along? And then again, the FAIR principles in fisheries. Let's see. What is stock assessment? For those who don't know, a short summary here. We have catch data. Don't forget catch data. I mean, we do the biology, we do the abundance by research surveys and so on, but catch data also are important, and then into assessment and all the way linking to the laws and regulation and enforcement, which actually is something we didn't talk a lot about, enforcement, but quite essential actually. So from stock assessment, there's a whole host of methods and models. Again, to get an overview of that, best practices should use repositories. And how to use these models, how do we categorize them, what are they, can they be transferred from one application to another? And then moving into community modeling approaches, which is happening but should be stimulated. And then management strategy evaluation, MSE, is something that is happening all the time, and we should really develop best practices for that area as well. You know, this area fisheries is stakeholder interaction is a key all the time, and making advice based on whatever data you can collect, and making data collection strategies is equally important to handling the actual data which are in there. So within fisheries management, we aim for a target, we provide data to support that, and we have this whole idea of stakeholders and controls that come into the picture to do the management in the end. This is really key to do the management. So from that part, dialogue, management objectives, documentation, the best available science. There are some principles out here that are emerging from various organizations that we can maybe put together as common messages across stakeholders, ecosystem approaches, climate change. This is a complex field. So overview is very complex, very different cases in industrialized high-tech fisheries to artisanal subsistence fisheries, but we do manage to get some common messages, it seems. Transparency, best practices for ecosystem-based management is kind of a dream. It's coming, but we need to go in that direction. And then we have big differences between data poor and data rich areas, but we see potential to actually bridge some of those gaps. So where are we going? We have 40 people here. The fisheries community is large. We should expand to more even geographical coverage and evolve the engagement and upload more into the system. How to do the decade implication, we certainly are aware of that and involved in the decade, so we will think about that. We thought we would try to put together a short paper soon to generate more interest and to achieve some of these goals here. And then we didn't discuss aquaculture for practical reasons. It's simply too big, but maybe we need to do a specific aquaculture focus in the future. So thanks to all the speakers, colleagues and rapporteurs and all of the participants and to the steering committee, and thank you for listening.
Thank you so much, Peter, for the summary. It's nice to see that your working group had a lot of overlap with other working groups, so it's really good. And we just have Emily now talking about her sargassum working group. So Emily, go ahead, please.
Thank you all. I'd first like to thank my co-chair, Shelley-Ann Cox from University of West Indies and Cesar Toro from Io Caribe of IOC UNESCO, and our Sea Grant Fellow, Leah Segui, who helped with some of the organization and note-taking. So just as a reminder, sargassum is a floating macroalgae that has become a real issue in the Atlantic, washing up on beaches in the Caribbean and causing issues for fisheries. And it also is extending all the way to West Africa and has had issues with the communities there as well. So in our working group, on Monday, we had presentations on science and technology related to monitoring and understanding the drivers of the sargassum proliferation. On Tuesday, we had our working group members attend a UN Environment IOC joint webinar that was on the sargassum issue in West Africa. And on Wednesday, we had presentations about monitoring and forecasting of sargassum. And then on Thursday, we focused on management practices for sargassum. Let's see, I'm just moving my video out of the way here. So some of the summaries that we had in terms of community needs related to understanding and managing sargassum is that there still is some more information needed on the basic science. So which species are blooming, what is the chemical composition, what is going on that is causing it to proliferate and wash up on beaches. And there also is a need to standardize various methods in terms of monitoring as well as management. We discussed that there is a need to identify organizations and groups who could vet the best practices, but there isn't likely to be a one-size-fits-all solution since it's a diverse issue where you have people who are going to be looking at chemical composition of it, as well as the biology and ecology, and management and satellite observing. We also discussed that there is a lot of interest in sargassum from its impact on people, and that we do need to connect the science of sargassum to its impact on people, likely to get funding for some of the basic science. There also need to be clear guidelines, enforceable regulations, and best practices in various countries, and that there is an understanding that different countries may have different management priorities depending on their resources and industries. We also have a need to increase sharing of information across the Atlantic, as well as within regions. And there also is a need for some concrete actions. So the community has been having a lot of collaborative discussions, and at this point, there is an urgency to move forward with identifying the best practices and moving forward. Some other items that we discussed related to the decade specifically are that we likely will need to look at public-private partnerships to move forward. So a lot of the management and investments that are going on related to management are being done in the commercial sector. So for example, there are hotels who have made large investments in machinery to clean up sargassum, and it would be great if we could connect them with government so that they can also help out communities that are not as well resourced, but still have the issues with sargassum. And we're hoping that the decade will provide an opportunity for partnerships among academics, pharmaceuticals, agriculture, and energy sectors who are interested in using sargassum as a resource. We also discussed that there's an important need to discuss the ethics related to sargassum. So for example, it's a very important ecosystem to a lot of important species such as sea turtles. And if people are going to start using it as a resource and harvesting it, we do need to have some ethical discussions about what that is doing to the ecosystems. Is there some certain amount of sargassum that is okay to harvest? What is the difference in biodiversity as it comes offshore to onshore environments? Is that changing? When and where would be the most ethical area to collect it, and items of that sort. So that's one thing that we were thinking the decade may be a venue for discussion about that. And then also we discussed that because this is a wide regional problem, that we really need to encourage the sargassum community to come together and seek funding collaboratively so that we don't have a lot of disparate efforts. And we also have an interest in the decade working to bring together the Atlantic community, so Africa all the way to the Caribbean. Some specific recommendations for the ocean best practices is that we need to get the private sector involved in terms of understanding the information. And there has been some unused, unshared data. And so one thing that we would recommend would be best practices on publishing and sharing data. So that would be very helpful, as well as integrating social scientists so that we make sure we're impacting the communities. Another big issue is that there has been some misinformation about what has been causing the sargassum blooms that has been proliferating across the public as well as governments. And so we need to make sure that there is vetted information by the scientific community that is then getting passed along. Some other recommendations are that it'll be helpful to include the cost of best practices. So for example, if you are going to use a certain technique, how much does this cost, including analysis, as well as a labeling system where you can have good, better, best. And one thing that also came up is that we also should include practices to avoid, such as using heavy machinery on beaches where sea turtles are nesting. And overall, we had a really great session and had, I think, for between 25 to 40 participants, depending on the day. And we look forward to working with the best practices community moving forward.
Thank you, Emily, for this nice summary. And it's nice to see that the decade was one of your focal points. That's really great. We just go ahead, just so that we stick with the time schedule, with René, and he will talk about marine litter. So please.
I will.
Oh, hi, there you go.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen, sorry. And now I'm starting so that's nice friends of mine.
Okay.
It's me, yep. Okay, so let's start. First, I would like to thank Arthur. Arthur was in his morning session at about 3 or 4 a.m. our time, so he skipped
René?
this one.
Yes.
Yes.
We don't see the screen share if you're using one.
I do. Okay, I'm sharing.
We still can't see the slides.
Ha, ha, ha. Okay, and now,
Yes.
how does it go? Sorry for that. Just click the wrong button. Anyway, so I'd like to thank Arthur because, as I said, he was in the morning session at 3 or 4 a.m., so he skipped this one. And we'd also like to thank the early career persons who helped us and all the people that are listed here who helped us as well. Some numbers. This was kind of a sub workshop in a sense, because we had lots of thematic session. The subject is widespread between many topics. So 7 thematic session, 17 hours of presentation, lots of discussion time, 25 to 75 participants depending on the sessions. And we try to focus on the role of developing and promoting best practices in policy research, monitoring, data management, co-creation of knowledge, etc. So we have some recommendation per session. And also we found out the opportunities to cross-check with some other or several others working group, like, of course, data management, but also uncertainty, training, ethics, fisheries, which I forgot to add. Session 1, which was divided in 2 sessions, one on a Monday, one on a Wednesday, because the availability of people. That's a global framework for setting priority variables and indicators. In a sense that I put in red IMDOS, which is the Integrated Marine Debris Observing System view, and the UN platform for which we are working, the UN Environmental Program, which has another kind of view. So the idea is to reconcile these two frameworks, and IMDOS is more the practitioners in a sense, and monitoring marine litter in terms as well of SDG indicators, but also developing some kind of connection with essential ocean variable, the EOVs. And the UN platform is more a knowledge-based managing data, processing data, and I would say so. IMDOS is more an information one oriented, like as Pierluigi presented also. Session 2 was towards standard sampling protocols based on something that already exists. You see on the screen that the existing GSAMP monitoring guidelines, I'm not, don't read, you can't read the fine prints, but the idea is to consider scientific, methodological, environmental, technical, and ethical constraints when we adopt a common methodology for the monitoring and the assessments. So session 2 had some recommendations which are listed, shortlist the most relevant indicators for global monitoring. That's more on the side of the indicators. What kind of formal guidelines for these indicators, recommendation for enabling large-scale assessment in models, remote sensing, which are connected and which were 2 sessions, by the way. You can read that, and we found that we could have a good cross-check with the data and info management working group. I'm speeding up because I still have many slides. Session 3, that's remote sensing. Remote sensing is a kind of community by itself, and so they had the 2 hours dedicated only to presentation, not really discussions, and they came up with the fact that remote sensing from space to see plastics is very, very difficult. So it's an emerging field in terms of research. Many different technologies from space, that's satellites, but as well drones very close to the surface, and in between CubeSat or NanoSat. So they are establishing and adapting and updating some operating protocols. And they have more the IMDOS point of view, that is, they would like to standardize the methodologies and also cross-check. Yes. Citizen science, they are more on the platform view in a sense, and so they consider that they should not standardize anything. So they have ethical requirement and training and feedback. There is a lot of connection with possible connection with ethics in a sense, and they think that they should be fostered in several ways, recommending that the UN integrates citizen science in their scheme. I still have one more and 1 minute. So best practice for modeling, that's the connection with the remote sensing, and the idea is to, okay, compare things. Everyone has models. How do they compare? It's a gap there. And finally, 2 sessions on a global platform for marine litter monitoring and informing action. So the platform that UNEP is developing, and the next one, which I have still 20 seconds to present is the same in terms of best practices in informing action. And you can see that there are lots of questions, gap analysis, focus on participatory modeling, and the co-usage of knowledge. And I have 1 second left. I'm done.
That's awesome. Thank you, Renee. It's nice to see that most of the recommendations are similar across working groups. So it's really good.
Exactly, yeah.
And now I invite Maria to talk about surface radiation, to give her summary.
Yeah,
Please go
thank
ahead.
you. Just a moment that I'm sharing my screen. Do you see it?
Yes, it's not presenter mode, but it's fine. Now it's presenter mode.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, I'm a co-leader of this section, and Megan presented this morning, so I'm just giving this presentation now. And so the aim of this working group is to try to connect land-based observing system and ocean observing system in order to create a global network. And during this day, several interesting people participate, giving their experience about the method that they are using in the ocean, using ship, buoy, and but also aircraft. And some interesting challenges came out, like for instance, the shadows and reflection of solar, warm and cold object in field of view of higher. The things related with the moving platform, because they could change the effective zenith angles of solar direct beam. So the motion related with the wind, so which is the mean tilt, the wave rocking, the platform navigation. And we need to modify the electronic housing. For instance, the amplification and digitization of small voltages for accurate measurement of thermistors. And also it was really interesting to see which kind of environmental contamination are occurring in the sea, like dust, dew, ice crystals, sea salts, but also guano and bird boats. The issues is, I mean, we need to have a calibration reference system, because at the moment is or not always available or poor quality. And for this, in this regard, Megan says that she had a proposal form from no one, say that we need to have a land-based calibration facility. Which is our working group strategy. Compile a list of papers showing the performance statistic for different sensors. So compare the different sensors that are actually now available in the field, and develop the best practices related with surface radiation. And also propose expanding land-based calibration facility to handle ocean-based sensor system. How to get the accurate measurement in a moving platform, for instance, that sometimes are also inaccessible. So, which is the uncertainty related with the moving platform. And proposing the intercomparison, so experiments between ocean land test-based sites, and also writing a report, and as well a peer review paper. And we put like for each section a leader, in a way that we can proceed in a kind of structured way. Another important thing that came out is about the power radiation and UVB. So how the community of biogeochemistry want to have also the measurement of solar radiation for their own purpose, and we need to know how to advise them. Basically, they need it for each budget, and especially UVB is used for kind of biological application. Like, and another point that has to be addressed is the upwelling and albedo. We know that there are some big errors related with them. So we need to quantify and understand which is the error related with this. And some experts suggest to use models, or like to use existing data, and Another point is the power limit of the sensor, the stability of the platform. Does the platform have a mean tilt? And does platform have a variable tilt? Does sensor experience, for instance, cold temperature or high? So in this regard also, we had some suggestion for expert, which sensor is used for each kind of expertise. And so we want to develop best practice for sample scheme for B-hazard and thus 1 minute average of 1 Hz data. Sensor system modification that could be transferred to industry, because each group can develop their own practice, their own modification. So we need to transfer this modification directly to the industry. Handling, setup, and maintenance, so refurbishing, cleaning, installation, placement, motion correlation, and for instance, also the calibration strategy, understand the outward intercomparison versus factory codes. Post-processing to filter out or flag bad data, correction to effective zenith angle, so also correction of the calibration. And also don't forget the sanity check and test for goodness of the data. So to synthesize, the purpose is to find a bridge between ocean and land-based radioman community, compiling with a list of papers showing the performance statistic for different sensors. So in this way, develop best practice for surface ocean observation, suggesting, expanding also the land-based calibration facility. Also propose intercomparison experiment at ocean land test-based site, so near shore and also land-based tower references. And as I told you also before, write a report and a peer review paper. We've set a deadline on this. So it's important to emphasize that this is urgent, it's really important, because the ocean network of surface radiation is expanding really rapidly, and the surface radiation network is expected to expand from 4 stations to more than 50 in the next couple of years. So we need to develop the best practice for 2030. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, even below the time. That surprised me. Sorry. Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for the summary. No, it was awesome. It's good. Well, thank you. That was really good. And it's interesting to see that the decision tree comes up again and again. That's really good. Well, we're just going ahead with our last summary for today, which will be presented by Robin, and it's about the DNA workshop. So please go ahead, Robin.
Hi everyone, let me just share my screen. All right, can everyone see that? Great. Okay, so my name's Robin Samuel. I'm one of the early career co-leads for the Omics and eDNA working group. And I've been working with Neil Davies, Katie Pitts and Ray Samer. So for our sessions, we decided to split each day into different categories. So for the first day, we were talking about everything about samples. And then on the second day, we were talking just about bioinformatics and analysis. And then on the third day, we started discussing data and information stewardship. And what was really nice about this is that we could actually link with the data and information working group. And then on the fourth day, we started to talk a bit more about links to society. And this, again, was really great because we got to link with the ethics working group as well as the data and information working group. So before we started the workshop, we actually sent out a little survey to some of the participants. And part of that, we asked what are the best practices for that are being shared by your research groups. And actually one of the things that we found was that people aren't really sharing the best practices and their protocols. So on the first day, we wanted to ask why the groups weren't publishing their protocols, and then start to think about what could motivate our community to start sharing these things. And then also we started to discuss about what the community would want from an OBPS endorsed best practice. And then we started to look to like a 2 to 10 year vision for this. And again, we actually had things coming up like templates for publishing protocols, but also again, this idea of a decision tree. So then on the second day, when we were talking about bioinformatics and analysis, we were asking again, what would motivate the community to share all of the code? And then we wanted to know what sort of metadata is really essential to go with this code. And then because of the previous day, we had a lot of interest in this decision tree idea. We decided to see what a decision tree for bioinformatics protocols might look like. So there's a whole lot of detail in all of these slides, and I'm not going to go through all of it, but we will share the slides afterwards so that you can, if you want to have a little look at some of the details for these questions. Okay, so then on the third day, we were talking about data and information stewardship. So yeah, this was really great because we, for a couple of the sessions, we were joined up with the data and information working group. And we started off by asking how is the omics and eDNA community doing on fair data and metadata? And then we were asking what relevant standards are people already using, and how adherence to those standards could actually be made easier or rewarded. And then we wanted to talk about how the OBPS can improve the culture of data stewardship for the omics and eDNA community. So then on the fourth day, we were talking about society, and this was really great because we were talking with the ethics working group as well as the data information working group. And throughout the week, we were picking up all of these principles for ethical data. And at the beginning of the session, we just did a little poll to see how many people within the session had actually heard of any of these protocols. And what we found is that actually some of them really aren't well known within the omics and eDNA community. And for those of the ones that are more well known in the omics and eDNA community, it's kind of difficult to see how to apply these. Might need to be a bit of guidance on how to apply these to our work. So then for the rest of the session, we were talking about some of the ethical, legal and social issues. We also had a separate little chat about policy, and we were talking about how the OBPS can support education and training, not only for the researchers, but also actually for policymakers and managers that might start using omics and eDNA for things like environmental impact assessments. And then also as well for the public to raise ocean literacy around microbial biodiversity. One of the great things was this about these meetings was that if there was a topic that was of particular interest within the group, then we could actually set up these additional meetings. So we had one on autonomous technologies, another on biobanking, and another on metabarcoding primers. And then also what was really great there is that we got a lot of communication between field scientists and data management. And I think the workshop has been a really great forum to connect with these cross-cutting working groups. So at the end, we were going through all of our session notes, and we noticed that there were quite a few reoccurring themes. And we think that the OBPS is a really great location to have, like this centralized location for metadata templates, things like decision trees, for deciding which protocols are available, and then it's a good location to have training and outreach. but also it's really great to be able to coordinate between all of these national and regional programs that are happening. Okay, so we've just got a few preliminary recommendations. So what we support is a sort of network approach to coordinate the omics and eDNA best practices across regions. And this would go for things like both data and sample metadata standards, systems that ease compliance. So this would be like the things like the decision trees, and systems that can build incentives and make sure that people get recognized for publishing protocols. And then as well for training and outreach that connect to society. And then the relevance within the Ocean Decade and for Sustainable Development Goals. We'd like a globally coordinated omic and eDNA action could really help to mobilize the community and accelerate the development of recommendations. As well, it could really leverage all of these existing national and regional programs that are already addressing many of the elements that need to be advanced. And actually there's a huge benefit there of taking these regional efforts and putting a global perspective on that. Okay, so yeah, that was about everything. We also just wanted to say thank you to Pierre and Cora, who've really helped with setting up the working group.
Thank you so much, Robin. That was a really good summary and a good talk. And nice to see that you're actively linked up with other working groups. That's a really good approach. Thank you for that. So before we go into the breakout discussion, which will take around 20 minutes, we will do a Mentimeter poll. And Ben just posted the link for the Mentimeter poll into the chat. So it would be nice if you would go onto this Mentimeter poll. And again, I should say thank you to all the presenters for this amazing summary. I know other people and myself, we didn't have the time to go to other working groups, so it's nice to get that summary so we are all on the same page. It's really good. And we did a lot of work during this week. So please click on this Mentimeter one. I think Ben wanted to share his screen so we can.
I will share screen.
Oh yeah, Johannes will share his screen.
No problem.
So we can see the results while they're coming in.
You should see now my screen.
Yeah, it's a tiny screen.
Can you maximize the window?
Yeah, maximize the window,
Oh, yeah.
Johannes.
I can even go into a presenter mode.
1987.
Yeah. And so the question is, what are the biggest priorities for ocean best practices and the ocean best practice community? And the biggest word on this slide is communication. So as we've heard already by the summaries, that communication is a really big issue that we have to do a bit more often and a bit more frequently. And collaboration is also considered a really big priority. That is nice. There's lots of words I can't even read as fast as they're coming in. Outreach. Sure, we've heard that a lot, that outreach and training will be really important also to get the word out that ocean best practices is actually existing. Not many people knew about ocean best practice, sadly. Coordination is another big thing. Man, there's so many words, I can't even read it that fast. Transparency, yeah, we talked about this in our working group as well, the transparency on how we do best practices and what is considered best practice and how we review them is really important. Oh, it stopped, so people stopped posting. That's nice, so I can actually read the names and the words. But then Johannes stopped sharing his screen, and so I can't read it anymore.
I can switch you on again, no problem. I will post that actually. Can I post that?
Yeah.
Wait a second.
That's all right.
Oops.
And if it was all too fast for you guys, I mean, the Mentimeter poll is still open. So you just click on www.menti.com and plug in the code Ben just posted in the chat. So you can even do that tomorrow. The poll will be open for quite a while.
So 33 people now provided input.
There you go. We have 78 participants and 38 people. So half of them provided feedback. That's good.
Okay, right? I think it crystallizes out here. Communication is the topic. Collaboration training, very good.
Yeah, it's really nice. Well, you can talk a bit more about this, Johannes, if you wish.
Well, I think it speaks for itself, right? Communication, collaboration, interoperability, training, that all, I think these are all, I think we are well placed. I would think that Ocean Best Practices system, I mean, the reason why we're all here is good placed in that context. Okay, I stop sharing, and you still can vote more and more.
And then I'm sure Ben will put us into the breakout room so we can discuss even more and be more interactive.
Yes, we're ready to do that, to move into that phase now. So I know this is a lot that everyone's taking in with all the presentations and great conversation in the chat as well. So we're going to move into the breakouts. I'm just going to take a couple minutes to set that up for you. You know, do take care of yourselves if you need to, you know, to take a short break, but wait until we move into the breakouts and to do that. If you're not going to stick around for the breakouts, actually, then this is a better time to leave, because I want to make sure that the rooms that we set up have 4 to 5 people in them as best I can. And I see that a few people are dropping off. So here's what we're going to do. You'll be in groups of 4 to 5. The question you're going to consider again is the one that Johannes posed at the beginning. You know, that really speaks to this notion that the OBP system is here as a service that's being made available to you and your community. And so the point of this conversation is for the steering group, the leaders of this, to really hear from you how to improve that service. And the question that's been chosen to focus your attention there is the following: what are the key messages arising out of the themes, patterns, and synergies you are noticing from the workshop and the working group reports? What are the key messages arising out of the themes, patterns, and synergies you're noticing from the workshop and working group reports? And Nod will drop that into the chat for you as well, so that'll travel with you to the breakouts. A couple of other notes about this. One of the first things you should do is pick somebody who's going to share some written answers that you come up with. So as a group, come up with, say, 1 to 3 very specific and clearly written answers, short, to the question. And when you come back, the person you've chosen is going to paste those into the Codigital tool, which we'll be looking at, an ideas engine as it's called, which it's more than just a poll. We'll see all your answers, but then you'll be able to rank them, you'll be able to offer edits, etc. We'll look at that when you come back from the breakouts for about 10 minutes, and then we'll have a break after that as well. So make sure one person is ready to post those answers in. Finally, you're self-facilitating in these groups. We've tried to get a bit of a distribution of some of the more senior folks from OBPS who can kind of support that, but really we don't, we want them to be participants as well in all of this. So make sure all voices are heard in your group, and it's all right if there's a pause, allow a little time for reflection. You don't have to fill every second of airtime, but really enjoy yourselves and get to know one another as well, right? You'll see a 1-minute warning at the close of the breakout sessions, which I think we have 20 minutes to run. So you'll be coming back at 10 minutes after the hour. And so you'll see that 1-minute warning, and there's a button that says return to the main room. Don't click the button, just stay there and use that final minute with your group. If you do happen to click it, no problem, you'll just join me here a little bit early. But with that, I think we are ready to move into the breakouts. Let me just do one more check here. Yeah, I'm going to shuffle the groups around a little bit because we've lost a few folks. So while that's happening, you can just start to reflect on that question. And then I'll show you. So welcome back, everyone. We're now going to take about 10 minutes with the Codigital Ideas Engine to share the results from your breakouts. And I'll just show you what this is going to look like. You'll see a link in the chat in just a minute, but let me just show you a preview. So when you click that link, it's going to take you to a screen that looks like this. There's that question again, and you'll click enter as guest. Don't worry about logging in. You can skip the quick tour. I'm giving you that right now. And you'll see these 3 buttons. So add is what you'll click to put your idea in, and you can then hit submit, and you can do that a few times. And then as that happens, you'll start to see ideas show up here, and you'll start to see some other options here. And I'll just go over to one that we have running from before. So as ideas, this was a playful exercise we did before of what suggestions do you have for the cafe sessions next week? And we have, looks like 10 ideas are in here. So as they're added, then you see your options to rank them. You click rank, and it gives you a pair and says, which one do you like better? Vote for this one or vote for that one. And you know, sometimes it's hard to say, just pick one, but if you have a strong preference, that makes it easy. You can also click edit. So, you know, go for a swim. If you want to change that from a swim to a walk, you can just delete that and type walk and then submit that. And then that shows up as something you can resolve. So as people are making edits, if they do, you can see the different edits and you can vote for them. Yeah, let's capitalize Starbucks. I like that. And then as this happens, you'll see these change and you'll see red and green that show things moving up and down in the rankings. And we'll have a report that we can share at the end as well. And yeah, so if you have any trouble with this, don't sweat it. I'll share my screen so you can just kind of watch what's happening anyway. And we'll keep the poll open a little bit afterwards too. So beyond this call, if you wanted to get in there and play around. This is all just advisory, right? These rankings are not determinative of anything, but it's information that's useful to you, useful to the steering committee as they process all of this and work towards a synthesis. And it will also feed into our conversations in the second part of the plenary coming up when we're done with this and after the break. So go ahead. I think the link should be in the chat right now. Go ahead and click that. And those of you from your groups who are adding ideas, go ahead and add them. I will share my screen. Yeah, we've already got a bunch showing up here. You see when they first come in, they have asterisks. That means nobody's voted on them yet. So you want to click rank again or resolve to go ahead and do that. And maybe we'll hear a little more music while all this is going on. Give me just a second to get back to that. Ah, yes. Time for a little toots. I have to reshare my screen with audio. Share computer sound. Share that. And here we go. Actually, that wasn't what I wanted to do. We were going to do this one. Get to vote. You've got a lot of ideas. Start ranking them. You can also edit. Once you're in those pairs, you'll see the edit option. Board is moving. can stop adding ideas and start ranking the ones that are here. There's 39 ideas. It's fine if some of them duplicate too. It's all just data. Click again, you click ranked here. No edits yet to be voted on, it looks like. Movements. Converging on conversions. So we'll keep this open for anyone who wants to keep playing around, but we do have a 15-minute break programmed in now. I know it's been quite a stretch here, a lot to take in, and I'll post a link to the PDF with the results into the chat here shortly. So the music will continue, Codigital will stay open, and we will see you back here at 35 minutes after the hour. Right. Mark, should we give it another few seconds here? We're not. Yeah.
So I continue my technical expertise. I downloaded the output of that last thing, and the PDF won't display it for me. But we all saw it being formed, and I thought I'd throw out a couple of ideas about what I think we should be looking for as we try to home in on 6 to 12 of these 39 ideas that we just waded through. But the very first thing I'd point out is that the outcome of this 45 minutes is not a definite selection of 6 to 12 of them. It's just a discussion for everyone to have an opportunity to weigh in. We've got 50 participants here, and it's a rare opportunity to hear from you. So I hope you won't be bashful. I think that whatever rises to the surface should make the best use of pretty limited ocean best practice system resources. There's 16 volunteers on the steering group, And so we're in no position to contribute a whole lot to some very valid idea. It's going to take the community to make it happen. It should be a high profile thing, something that will clearly benefit a lot of us. And then the third thing is that it should have a high probability of quantifiable success. And so we saw communication as the largest word there. It's a great idea. I listed it first myself, but I don't think it's specific enough. And so it should be communication. And here are the specifics over the next 3 years or so forth. So those are my thoughts. And I can tell you that the breakout group that I just got back from, we spent a lot of time talking about the decision tree and what exactly that means. Is one decision tree fits all? And this is really a question for Pierluigi. Can you pick from a drop-down list of EOVs and then pick from a list of low resolution, low cost, and narrow it down like that? Or would a decision tree need to be specific to surface radiation? We saw that group asked for one. What do you think, Pierluigi?
Mm-hmm. This came up in the morning session too, and also in our discussions at the data group. There will be lots of documents coming in, and there could be a case where you have, let's say, a community that is very strict about what methods they can and cannot use. It's hardwired. In that case, you can do a sort of hardwired decision tree to help people, it's static. It helps people choose the right one for their situation. But with the global set, we're going to need to use some technology there where people can answer light questions, similar to what we did with Mentimeter, like list a few of your main instruments you're going to use. List some of the main environments you're going to work in, some of the main societal goals you're concerned with. And that will use our text mining technology to narrow down the set of documents that match all of those criteria, allowing multiple entry points. That way we can then try to deliver something at least that's more relevant. We'll learn as we go. I think we need to talk to the community about how they make decisions, about what they need. And I think that's the key. If we get little stories from even those in this meeting about what helps you make a decision about what method you're going to use, if you give anecdotes from real life situations, that can help us design the technology to make it feel more natural and also cope with unpredictable documents coming in.
Okay. I think that's what Anya was trying to explain to me, and I was too thick to get it. But what you just said, I think I understand now that her suggestion was that it's more about the process of creating the decision tree versus the actual implementation of it. I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but I think that's the case. And anybody else have any thoughts on the decision tree? Because it percolated up to the top. We ought to talk about it.
If I made a comment, I think that it will depend a lot on what are the responsibilities that we are trying to what we are trying to decide. For instance, if we are looking at an emergency management, yeah, we have an oil spill or we have a sargassum inundation. So that you will need to have a series of standard operating procedures, and you will need to have a national plan on how to react in those cases. Yeah. From that point of view, you will need to have using the paraphrasing what Pierluigi you said is more wire, because you can afford to try to learn during the process in order to react and provide the necessary advice on what to do and when to do it. Who is involved in that decision-making tree? And if we are, the other is if we are really willing to develop the best practices for a particular subject. In that case, the model that Pierluigi is allowing, that like learning by doing, that may help us to learn and to strengthen that decision-making tree.
It's a good point, and as you were speaking, I thought that perhaps the solution is to plan to build a more generic type of decision tree, but start out with a specific one as an example, and then build upon that. I don't know whether that constrains the problem too much, or whether it's a good way to make a first step.
Seems to me a good way to do an exploratory first step to pick one of the examples that Cesar suggested, for example, a sargassum event, and see if there's ways you can, what's the best way to inform action around that event?
To me, it's like the ethical issues. It's like depending on the context, depending on the situation. So maybe case studies, best practice in kind of best study, case of, case studies would be helpful, but it's difficult always to come out with big guidelines, because this would work maybe for some culture countries with some economy and will not necessarily work with the other. So maybe it's good to always say that it's in a specific context when we provide best practices in that type of management.
If I may, I think that they are not exclusive, both. When we reach, for instance, a decision-making tree that is, let's say, already well conceived, and we have the first example of the emergency, decision-making. So that is the result of the process of learning that we have started with the different communities, etc. And we agree that the best, but we have that what it was pointed out as the learning by doing is a preliminary phase in order to reach that already well-wired decision-making tree. And that is connected to what our colleague said on, that is depending on the specific area or case we are developing. Michelle, yeah.
I think that what Cesar is referring to is really important. You know, if you think about emergency management, I brought up the discussion of a decision tree because at least the ocean acidification community has sort of come together to say, okay, what are some practical best practices that we can recommend that might be lower cost, but we still think that they're adequate for observing this phenomenon. And we think of a decision tree as aiding people. We've like had requests for such a product, and from people who are establishing their monitoring programs from scratch, and they really don't know what they'll be able to achieve with what they have or what equipment they can invest in if they have very limited funding. I work primarily in lesser resourced countries that are trying to do a lot with very little, might have enormous ocean portfolios that a single person is responsible for. So I think there's decision trees for establishing a program. You know, what should I do if I'm starting? And then there's sort of decision trees for responding to a need, like maybe what Cesar is saying about an emergency situation. As far as, you know, an example, we have it on our to-do list as a community, the OA community. We're going to be creating one. So that's there once it's ready.
I realized I've been thinking too narrowly about a decision tree tool. I had it in mind that it would be an ocean best practice system tool for mining the repository. But in fact, most of you are talking about actually the capability to create a decision tool for a specific thing like harmful algal bloom or sargassum.
But the two are not necessarily separate, because the results of going through that tree will be pulling results from the repository. So they'll work together, I think.
Okay.
I do think I love the idea of this, text mining version to kind of use the repository. I think a narrative, statement on the use of the decision tree for different disciplines will be important. Probably different disciplines will want to define, things in different ways, but at least within the OA community, we would say, like, you can use this method, but the limitations of your data are going to be X, Y, Z. You will or won't be able to make these types of arguments. And so having like a narrative component, perhaps with the mechanized, tree, I think will be important.
If I may, I think in the decision tree, we need, to have scientific advice on best practices, but we need also to have the advice from the people that are working in the field, that are dealing with these emergencies issues. And this is really important because sometimes we think one way because we are scientists, and what's going on really, it can be different. So this maybe at this point, then these opinions should be included into this kind of best practice.
So Emma has just posted that perhaps a pilot project would be worthwhile. We spent a fair bit of time on the decision tree, and now I'm thinking that I'm hearing the communications part of the effort to build a decision tree, and so there's a linkage there, and we might be able to tie those two together. I wonder if we could cobble together a pilot over a year or 2 years time with interested parties who are have interest in developing a decision tree and facilitate the communication of that effort. That blends a couple of things together.
Yes, I think that developing the pilot will be an interesting exercise. But here, when we are taking decision is if you go one step back, and when we are discussing, for instance, policy making and the policy cycle, this is exactly what we are doing here when we are developing that policy decision making tree. Is that you will have, as was rightly pointed out by Michelle and Alexis, is you have one moment where science and information and data is inserted into the process. So you take the best available data and information and best available science, and you go forward and you decide what will be the strategy or the way how you are going to decide on implementing the decision. And then once you have implemented the decision, and in order to implement the decisions, you will need to have the views of the different communities that will be impacted and will implement that decision. Yeah. So it's not only science, we sitting as scientists there, but in order to take the decision, you need to perform the best decision directly in the field. So that will be necessary to have the views and insert that in the process of the decision, the views of those communities that will be impacted directly by that decision, or how they will need to implement that. So that it will help us to imagine how that will work that decision-making process.
Do you think if we work to organize something like that, we'd be able to achieve enough participation?
I think we could try, but of course, these things require resourcing, funding, and expertise, right? So I think we've had some success already in having, for example, EU projects feature a link to the ocean best practice system to develop one part of it. Yeah, and that's how we designed the system, that it's modular. If you want to extend one of its functions, it should be approachable as part of a grant that you wrote and acquired. And we are very happy to work with people who have that. Again, all of the code is open source, and we welcome different versions and different trials. So that could be a route forward, saying that we're open to collaboration through work packages and grants, etc. And we can take that system forward through that. Because again, IOC has provided the core functionality, is protecting that core functionality, but for these sort of wonderful ideas, we do need to think about acquiring external funding and expertise and people, more importantly, to realize them. But of course, we're willing to do so.
Okay, Ben has just offered to share the Codigital results, and I think it would be a good idea to take another look at that.
Yeah, and people are still voting, so they've actually changed a little bit.
Okay.
Interoperability is now at the top, whereas before...
Ooh, that was one I wanted to talk about. The word interoperability means so many different things to so many different people. That clearly doesn't meet the threshold of quantifiable results in a fixed time. So if anybody who voted for interoperability wants to expand upon what they think it means, that would be great.
And you can reflect that in an edit to that idea as well. If you click on it, then you see the evolution history, and then you can offer an edit. So if you want to make that more specific, you can change up to 40% of it, and then others can vote to resolve that. So these ideas can evolve, and we can keep this tool running for as long as you want to do that, or maybe run another instance of it that synthesizes these results and the ones from the Pacific session too.
Christian speaking. This first idea was written by Shaila and myself. Probably I can, the idea behind of what we stated here was rooted on mostly from the metadata interoperability and for acquiring or towards getting that convergence between or to facilitate the convergence of methods and standards. That was a bit the idea behind, in order to also gather or make possible as far as we can. Again, going to this endorsement process to be displayed by the Ocean Best Practices system. Yeah, also the issue of the templates for developing best practices or for the metadata that goes into the submission was also an underlying idea on that. There were many things related there, so we ended up with this high-level idea. Apologies if it's too vague in that sense. We didn't expect we would become the first ones.
But it's interesting because this I'm sorry, Mark, may I?
Yes, please.
I'm sorry. So in this morning's session, it was also the same case. People had very different ideas of what this word is, and we discussed it also this morning in Europe. And you know, at the high level, at the highest level, what does it mean? The ability of things to work together, so between one another, right? Somehow, you should be able to build something, and what you've built can seamlessly work with something somebody else has built. That happens through standardization, that happens through communication, so those things can talk to each other. And that's very important because it takes a huge amount of burden off of the users of that thing that you built, so that they don't have to figure out, okay, how do I make these things work together? Because they already do, so that they can get on with the business of solving problems in the world or learning new things about our planet.
Pierluigi, if I can just jump in, what you just said is exactly what I think of interoperability, but it's the things communicating are machines, right?
Yeah, so I can, if I could share my screen, I can give an example of what that could mean on a machine level, at least in the FAIR principles perspective. Is that all right?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. This is just one example of many, and of course there are different ways to think about this, but let's see if I can get that. So, as you know, the Ocean Best Practices system, it operates by using ontologies to tag up the text. So some of the ontologies we develop in OBO and some that Gwen, who's on the call, they develop at the BODC, the Learn Vocabulary Service. And those ontologies, when it finds a word, it models a bunch of knowledge around that word. So if we looked at a glacier, for example, this is a fair representation of knowledge of a glacier. You can access it on the web with this URL. It'll always take you to this term. It has a human readable definition and then machine readable stuff here. So the machine understands what a glacier is, essentially. But the interoperability bit is here. So this term in this ontology is mapped to a term. We do collaborative work with ESIP, the Earth Science Information Partners, NASA, NOAA, USGS, and others who founded it. And they have an ontology too that talks about glaciers. Now, we don't want to be competitors with them, so we want to interoperate with them. So we have a working group that links the terms in this ontology to the ones in that one. Therefore, it doesn't matter which one the user uses, you can still have the benefits of both. And I think that's very important because socially, that changes the relationship between our ontologies and their ontologies into one community of practice that interoperates, and we have collaboration instead of competition. So that's an example of what interoperability can mean, at least in the semantic tech world. Thank you for allowing that.
As always, Pierluigi, you can take a complex issue and make it pretty clear. I have just to remember all that now.
If I may, based on the comment in the chat, there is the idea of maybe having a special issue. So why not thinking within the best practice research topic in frontiers to have one dedicated to ocean acidification or to another typical anthropogenic environmental issues, and then have everyone working in this topic through their different approach to provide information and the best practices in case of dealing with the emerging ocean acidification issue or other issues. Would it be feasible?
Thoughts, anyone?
Definitely the OA community would be happy to organize around that. And I think having actual pieces from the folks in lesser resource places who, I'll tell you, like even getting the rubber bands that will properly seal the sample bottles, I had to ship rubber bands to South Africa so that a sampling program wouldn't stop. So
it would be good to have special issue within the the research topic of frontiers, to have hot topic. Then we can gather the communities and the best practice from the scientific communities on one topic. Then we can invite people in the field and different actors to complete this approach.
Can we shift gears a little bit and talk about some thoughts on endorsement? In the chat, I'm seeing that it's the highest priority for some, and others say it's not important at all. What do you all think about Ocean Best Practice System and the need to endorse best practices or not?
If I comment on this, I think that as Peter Hogan is writing in the chat, when we are discussing endorsement, I think that the real focus should be on the process, how we develop that best practice, etc., and we get not necessarily the endorsement, but there should be an agreement on how that best practice is providing the necessary outcomes that we are looking for. The endorsement itself is going to an authority that's sitting there and saying, oh, these best practices have a label. That might be is like we are acting at the ISO 9000 or whatever. So we can ISO 9000 label is there because it's already prescriptive in minimum level of elements that should be in your practice in order to receive the label. So perhaps at this stage, more importantly, as pointed out in the chat, it might be to focus on the process, on how to make these best practices available and that is suited to the process that we are really willing to achieve. Yep. Yeah. Maybe that is a way of looking at this.
If I can jump in, thanks to Mark for raising this up. I was deliberately a little bit provocative in my comment. and that was to say that, you know, if we are to endorse anything, I think it should be more on principles What I would really hate to see is endorsement of this is the best practice in this area. Now everybody go ahead and follow it, because it's really about developing the best practice in view of new technological development, whatever. But there may be, so to open a discussion, I may open for endorsing principles or ways of working, or anything, not necessarily ethics, but codes and stuff like that.
When submitting a document to the best practice, there's already quite a few buttons you can push to identify where the submitter thinks it stands. Readiness level, peer reviewed, there's 3 or 4 things. And so it's pretty easy to submit a document that you think is a good document to submit, but might not necessarily be construed as a best practice for all. So there's already a pretty good base for where a document stands in the best practice repository. In the breakout group, someone raised a question about nefarious practices. It seems a matter of time until we're going to have to start discarding them. And I don't think we're prepared at all for that. Thoughts?
Well, Johannes here, can I say something?
Yeah, please.
I think we shouldn't forget that best practices are defined by something that is always further to be improved. And endorsement itself, as we kind of take it up here, is really something that should help communities to better navigate in the jungle of documents, I would say, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that this is really the ultimate and best thing at all. No. Because simply from our endorsement session also, we realized that different communities have, of course, very different expectations in what is in these best practices. And if there is some endorsement of a certain entity related to a best practice, it helps actually just for them to navigate in the jungle. And of course, Peter, I think it's also interesting to have more like generic endorsement attributes that are linked to documents in order to endorse them. That is another interesting point, actually, that we haven't discussed in the group, but it would be interesting to take that further, I think.
Christian would like to speak.
Yes, thank you. I wanted also to point another issue that, again, I saw that some of the questions raised in the breakout about having the system for voting, the usage of best practices and so on. So that's something that we've been discussing also for a few years. This endorsement process could also become something not like top down from something big endorsing like Goose saying, hey, this is the one, this is the good, but also having, because by definition that we have best practices to be fully elevated to best practices, it must be adopted by the community. So as more tax from different communities might be voting that best practice, that could be also an indicator of kind of community. I'm not sure if call it endorsement, but for sure it would be a good indicator of at least usage or adoption.
Peter, Peter Pearson's been trying to say something, please.
And Peter Hogan, I think, also wanted to make
Okay, I'm sorry, I'm not doing a very good job of seeing people. Just jump in, please.
We'll help you.
Okay, my suggestion was maybe we should rewind a little bit to the early days of the OBPS, because at that time we said, well, we do not really expect any higher power to endorse best practices, but we let the decision on best practices done by feet. I mean, basically, a community submits a practice that by the definition of best practice, is something they all use, and it's been working very well, and it's submitted to the system. And people, for example, within or working with that same community at a comparable geographic location or whatever, if they want to look for a practice, they can then use that one. And so we would then see a growth. We even talked about people being able to vote for a best practice based on their experience with it. It would become more and more popular because that would avoid the need of some sort of like I say, higher order that would decide what is the best practice and which is the best one and which one is not, which we decided at that time wouldn't work. So maybe we should go a little bit back to that original thought, which I still believe was a very valuable one.
I think I second that. And, you know, we have to gather the information on who said it, who says it's best, and why did they say it? You know, which operational reality is this best in? That's the valuable part, actually, because if we can mine those and say, imagine you're out there, the future of the OBPS, you turn on your augmented reality glasses, it scans the environment around you and looks at common features, and then it says, based on where you are and what you have in front of you, the technology you have, here's a bunch of practices that are relevant now. Those are the best ones right now. That could be perhaps interesting.
But it's always depending on the context. So be careful to not be judging things outside of their context, the scientific context or the environmental context. To me, it's really important, the context, because something you applied in one occasion might not necessarily be the best practice in the other occasion. So
we're in agreement.
When we are talking about ranking, I mean, it's a good idea, but yeah, how are we to judge what's going on in one specific region? And so, to me, we find to.
But that was my point. We do not go.
Yeah.
We have the users. For example, measuring oxygen. Depending in what kind of temperature zone you do this, you may need to use very different methodology. So people in a certain geographic area, they will try out a certain methodology that's been recommended for that region, and they will say, oh yeah, that works very well, I vote for that.
Okay, I see. So, but an endorsement system, we need to find an easy way and fast way to do it. You do not want a process of endorsement that is very long and heavy, and this is the only trick.
Ben, can you tell me how much more time we have? Another 15 minutes, I think?
10.
10, okay.
I put 25 after. I was wrong, actually. That it's supposed to end in 10 after, 20 after, rather.
Okay, so 10 minutes going to go by real fast. I suggest we pick up another one of the key suggestions, and that was training. Let's talk about training for a little bit. And to get that started, I'd like to point out that there's already a training video in the Ocean Best Practice System. It's been viewed 500 times. It's a capability that exists, and maybe we don't market it enough. When those of you who voted for training, what did you have in mind? I voted for training, and what I had in mind was more of those videos. There are plenty of best practices or practices that are at least adopted, and the video is a good way to get them distributed. How might we further this?
Based on the conversation we've had, you know, everything is very nuanced depending on the circumstances. So in the training activities that I run, I find one-on-one coaching with, you know, people starting out to be very effective, because then you can get at all that nuance. So having the best practices, and then for those groups like NGOs like myself, you know, that our mandate is really to provide these types of resources, we can provide connections. Basically, my role is the connector. I bring the expert scientist to the scientist who's starting out, and I facilitate a coaching session where they can say, okay, what's the temperature range? What's the depth that you're working in? How often can you go to your field site? Can you pick a site that's more accessible? What's the, you know, all those things that we were pointing out. I find that those one-on-one sessions, which can be done remotely quite effectively, are really useful as a component of training.
Sure, it makes sense, but how can Ocean Best Practice System help with that?
I mean, there could be a bit of a mentoring system. This is maybe beyond the scope, right, of the Ocean Best Practices system, but it's more how people can use those best practices and increase the adoption of them through training activities. I just think that you won't get the adoption unless you have those detailed conversations with people, because I find that people starting out get overwhelmed and they don't know where to begin or what to do. So if you have those one-on-one conversations, you know, if the OBPS system like has the bandwidth to provide, you know, mentor contact information for various categories of things, who might be able to provide a 1-hour coaching session with you, but that's asking a lot of people's time. So I don't want to suggest that if it's not possible.
If I can add to that, I mean, if we go back to the work of the working group on training, I mean, initially everybody sort of threw themselves onto online training now, but basically the group came to the conclusion it has to be a blended model, and it also has to be appropriate for what you're trying to train. If you're trying to do if you want to teach people oceanography, they have to do some ship-based work, and you cannot do that online. Maybe you can fake it a bit with virtual reality, but that has its limits as well. And you won't get people seasick. Well, you can try with virtual reality. But the point being, so it's a blended model, and I think for OBPS as a project, what the least we need to try, we have identified a number of training programs. We need to try to get those programs to use the material available in OBPS. That would be the minimum.
Yeah.
Mark, Raisa wanted to make a point.
Okay,
and then
please,
Michelle.
Raisa.
Oh, thank you. I agree with Alexis that the one-on-one coaching is a great idea, but as Peter mentioned with the blended model, having perhaps online resources and the one-on-one coaching, I think can create more inclusivity, because for the one-on-one coaching, you really have to have the context to NGOs such as the one that you're working with and the knowledge that something like this exists. And I think having something accessible to everyone to give some basic training and then maybe mention that other dimension that we could add to it would be really valuable.
The part that's clear to me is that Ocean Best Practice System can house the video or the documents necessary, and somehow work to identify individuals who can provide the initial coaching and hand-holding to encourage them.
But also in the Ocean Best Practice, you have a forum open. So maybe if you dedicate a forum to a specific topic, then having all the best practice related to discussion, and maybe to end it up with the training specific session. So you're working on ocean acidification, depending on the region, then you can have really this type of different best practices related to different contexts. So instead of having the methods, having the application of these methods to gather everyone from different point of view in different regions in the world.
Okay, I see Jay waving his hand.
Yeah, I'm wondering, following the last two comments of Raisa and Michelle, whether the forum could be the location for this sort of one-on-one mentoring opportunity or consultation opportunity. And therefore, if we do it in the best practice context as part of the forum that is Ocean Best Practice System, whether that could provide a nudge in the right direction.
Yeah, I like this idea of consultation, and maybe OBPS could offer through this forum a consultation for whatever are the issues we are facing. And it can be also included the ethics, legal, whatever issues, not only protocols, but also other issues. That's a good idea.
Okay, Raisa, let me give one comment, and then call on you. I'm glad you raised the forum. A fair amount of work went into establishing that forum, and we're anxious for people to use it. If you've got an application like you just mentioned, please, we're here to help you. Raisa?
Thank you. We were actually, as part of the omics and eDNA session, every once in a while, the need for a forum or the value of a forum was mentioned. And we were thinking that, well, right now we have the Slack space to allow our communication and our community to be linked. It would be maybe an even more valuable asset to have a forum that is inclusive to everyone who also maybe didn't participate in this workshop, and then let the conversations and discussions that started here live on, maybe create spaces for each working group if there would be a demand for that.
I think that's a good suggestion. We just have a few minutes. Does anyone have an issue that we haven't addressed? A word that came up that we should discuss, please?
Bridges.
I'm running out of steam.
On the topic you already mentioned, though, I think the idea of forums is great. And also for coaching, you could basically have a call for people to apply to receive a coaching session and offer them across this array of topics once a year, twice a year or something, because it can be unwieldy. You don't want a ton of people to go on to a Zoom call. It's really the one-on-one aspect that I think makes it really valuable. But not everybody's ready for a coaching session. They have to have a working knowledge of what they're trying to do. So also creating an application process is useful.
Mark, Johannes here.
Yes, Johannes.
There's this one element that we didn't really touch explicitly here in this session, which is the UN decade, right?
Yes.
An upcoming activity that has, of course, also relevance for us as a ocean best practices system. And it would be, of course, very interesting to learn more about the expectations or, yeah, what the community, and in particular those which are here on the call, think about involvement or ideas about how ocean best practices can contribute to the decade, what they expect actually ocean best practices to contribute to the decade.
Mea culpa, the word decade wasn't raised once in Ocean Uncertainty Working Group, and it's kind of ironic because I first became engaged in it at the Ocean Ops conference, and it's a large international event. I'd be surprised if half of the participants in our working group are even aware of the ocean decade.
Okay.
I hope that most of us were already well acquainted with the UN Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development. I would, what I would say is best practices is, I foresee a very distinct role that ocean best practice system could help us. The main idea of the UN Decade is to be transformative. We cannot continue doing business as usual in science, and we need to going from diagnostic to really using science for that sustainable development. And ocean practice could be one of the ways to show how that could be achieved. So that is for just starting the discussion here.
I'm just looking through the list of participants here. There's obviously, I think there's an underrepresentation of U.S. Participants, and we had mostly U.S. participants in the uncertainty workshop, and that's probably my fault.
I don't know if Peter Hogan is still there, but I think that I will really find out his views on the UN decade and ocean best practices. Peter, are you there?
I'm still here. I'm still here, and I'm listening in. I think some of us know the decade very well, and some probably don't. I mean, there was for example, a session I think yesterday run by the International Science Council and IOC to create co-creation of designing the decade activities, and there's a call for actions coming out on the 15th of October with a 3-month deadline. I think it's behind IODE, and maybe Peter P could elaborate on that. But it's a framework, but it's the biggest thing that has ever happened in oceanography, I think, at least in 50 years and maybe more, likely to be. But it's not a UN decade of ocean exploration. It's a UN decade of ocean science for sustainable development. And it's ocean science in a very wide interpretation of the world. Services, practicing. And you know, what becomes out of this is depending on who sort of signs up to it and use the framework. I'm affiliated with something called the high-level panel on sustainable ocean economy, which is 14 heads of state providing their recommendations for what to do in the next decade, and who are talking a lot about the decade and see the decade as a mechanism to provide the science and underpinning for policies that could help us provide a more sustainable future for the globe as a whole by working in the ocean. So I think this is a unique opportunity. We shouldn't miss it for best practices either. But again, it's early days, it's depending on how the players align with it. It's a process the planning of this started 4 years ago, right? So, and it's really one of the UN decades which has more planning behind it, I think, than most others. I'm myself quite skeptical to UN days and UN decades and whatever, but I think in this particular case, it's an opportunity that these communities couldn't miss.
So one of the comments I would make, Peter, is and all is that from my experience so far is that the UN decade is something that is looking outward and into the broader oceanographic community. It also does not necessarily directly bring resources for any activities. So the idea here is to identify what processes and activities that we do that align with the UN decade and position those activities in a way that they get visibility and contribute to the conversation of the decade. So it's what's really critical now is that we think about, well, what are we doing that can contribute to the international conversation, and how do we highlight that in conversations with the decade so that we bring profile to it? So more about alignment and visibility and communication than about actually any new activities. So we don't want to do new activities. We don't have the resources. We only want to do what we think is really important to do. So which of those activities is important enough internationally that it aligns with the aims and procedures of the UN decade? So I think that's an interesting conversation.
Sure, but I think the resources are also depending on how you convince that this is actually contributing to sustainable development and contributing to what everybody's looking for, because there is funding out there, but it's not just for, you know, any ocean science or any particular topic.
Well, in fact, the ocean best practice system is already benefiting from UNESCO's grandiose for a reason. And I would say that it got started with the support of NSF and IEEE too. So we've got some good backing for the ocean best practice system, and there must be a reason why.
Mm-hmm. And I'd also add to that, again, as Mark mentioned, there's a team of volunteers that have really been volunteering a great deal of time to make it happen. And they're doing that, dedicating their own resources, because it's of mutual benefit. That's that sort of co-design. Because if we do co-design and co-develop something, it will work for multiple people's objectives, and therefore they're more willing to direct their resources in that direction. The same is true it's like a microcosm of the decade in general. We shape it by our activity, and if it works for us, we will naturally allocate more resources. So that's why it's so open and why we extend the invitation, because we want it to work for a broad base of people, such that we can pool resources and then take the burden off any one individual. That allows it to work for places that have high or low capacity in new ways with new resourcing models.
I see Michelle raising her hand. I just want to jump in with a process note, and perhaps we pause this conversation and continue it in the final phase with Anya, or we skip the next little section we have where we're going to get a little bit out of the verbal mode and into more of imagery and collect some imagery.
But I just wanted to add one thing. Okay, we have to align with the UN decades priorities, but also it's our role as scientists to advise on any new topics that can be hot for the next decade. So, of course, we have to prove how good we are and answers and be able to provide all the means for the UN decades and all the scientific values, but we are also responsible for highlighting this, any kind of new hot topic.
I would like to suggest this discussion should be continued as we decide on specific recommendations, and certainly a recommendation reflecting the decade in this discussion could well be appropriate. I'm an eternal optimist, and one of my optimisms says if you have a really good idea and it has a lot of impact, it'll get funded. And that optimism will carry us through the decade in a very effective way if we can adopt it and think about it. Mark, I would like to encourage us to take a break. I love this discussion, but I think take a break and then let's reform for the recommendations and we can continue as appropriate.
That sounds fine with me. Thanks everyone for an excellent discussion. I appreciate your input.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks for moderating. Very good.
Thank you, Mark.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. And by break, Jay, I assume you mean the pictures at an exhibition, little exercise that
Yes.
you named it.
And people will love it. It's a great opportunity. Tell us what it is, Ben.
Yeah, so we'll take about 5 minutes to play with another little tool. This is Google Jamboard, which I think has become quite popular in schools here in the US. So I'll show you, we started this yesterday. So these are the boards that at the top here, you can just scroll through multiple boards and look at them, and you'll get to some, so you'll get to some that are empty. This is the question we're asking you. What does a best practice look or feel like to you? And the idea is that you're going to grab images. Over here is a little tool where you can add an image. You can also add a sticky note. There's other stuff to decorate, but I think these two are the most useful. One caveat is we want to use some of these in newsletters, etc. So we only want images here that we actually would have the right to publish. So they need to be Creative Commons, no attribution required, or your own image that you're sharing. There is a really nice platform website, unsplash.com, that is a place where you can get things that are freely usable, and quite a repertoire there. So I'm going to just turn on the music. We'll share the links to this, and we'll take
links are in chat.
Links are in the chat. Okay, yeah. Did you put the Unsplash link into?
Yep.
Let's go back to Jamboard. All right. So you've got the links in the chat, and yeah, let's play. I'll just scroll through, so you can just look at the images that are already here if you want, or add your own. And you just use the tool here to find a blank board.
Hi, Anya. How are you doing?
Hi.
I guess we have music, so we're in a break. I had to be in another meeting for a little bit.
Is that Frank?
Yeah.
We're in the main room, Frank. We all hear you.
So I did draft, just listening to the discussion, I drafted sort of 6 areas of recommendation, which I'm not sure whether or not you guys are interested in seeing, but maybe they could help us sort of zoom in on our, I'll just send it to you, Frank.
Anya, why don't you go to a breakout room? You can talk to Frank for a minute.
Okay, can we do that?
Yeah.
I don't know
Ben
how
will
to
do
do
it for
that.
you.
I guess Ben has to beam us up to another room.
Ben, could you beam us out for 5 minutes?
Yep, I can do that. We only have a couple more minutes of this.
I'm reading, Anya.
I moved. Here the week and stays there back into breakout. Do you want to check if Anya's ready to go? I think let's bring them back. Move into our final phase here. How'd you like Jamboard? This is another one we can leave open. I think it was mentioned in the newsletter, certainly yes, 2 days ago. Here's Frank. Anya, are you back with us? There she is. So Anya, you have the comm.
All right. Hello, everyone. And it's been a super interesting conversation. In this last 25 minutes, I'm hoping that we can have a conversation that takes us a couple of steps closer to actually doing some actions, and in maybe naming actions that we're already doing, to be efficient with our time and our energy. And I'll just very briefly, I'm going to, Ben, if it's okay, I'm going to share my screen.
Of course.
I would like to show you just a very short summary of some of the input that we've had so far from Plenary 1 and from this plenary. And I'm going to start up here. This is a courtesy of Rachel, who was the plenary host for the first plenary session early this morning when I was asleep. And the first plenary session, this is just to kind of set the stage, they synthesized 12 recommendations, of which the top 3 were decision trees, the kind of mechanics in terms of version control and templates and so on of the best practice system, and interoperability as the top 3. But there was lots of comments. If you go down to 4th, 5th, and 6th, integration with the UN decade, training, outreach, partnerships, there's a couple of things that we didn't talk about that they did, and one was the intercomparison experiments. That wasn't quite as, we talked about standard materials and so on. We didn't talk quite so much about that. And the promotion of the use of best practices through ambassadors. So I think that number 12, the digitization of the ocean, can everyone see this? It's too small. Make it a bit bigger.
Well, you can use the view options at the top and the zoom ratio. Yeah, you've made it a little bigger, that helps.
Okay, so basically the digitization of the OBPS to me is very much, the 12 would fold into, for example, number 2, which is getting the mechanics of the best practices system really enhanced, and keep working on that to keep it cutting edge and keep it delivering what it's delivering to us better. They also did a nice visualization, and again, collaboration and interoperability were really important as we're training convergence of methods. Metadata standards came up a little more for them than they did for our group. Then if we look at what we don't want to necessarily take this 100% and just import it, but we do want to, I think, factor this into the conversation since this is our final sort of half hour. And then I just did a cut and paste of the last view I had of our little poll here, and our top 3 are around interoperability. So again, the mechanics of trying to get the best practices system working optimally, providing more practical best practices that are cost effective to ensure more global adoption of best practices, and training and collaboration. So that was the basis on which we kind of went into our last session, which I thought Mark did a great job of keeping it really a nice open conversation. And I tried in listening to that to synthesize what was said in that conversation. And this is what I ended up with. So please criticize, add, or subtract. So we start off with Mark's suggestion of the criteria, which is that we really have to leverage resources. This is a volunteer organization, and we also want to use what we already have, that is work better and more deeply and more effectively with the best practices system as it exists now. We want to, anything we do, we want to be able to not just leverage resources, but quantify the success of it. So we're not firing off in all directions. And we really want to work for active community engagement be in this community and beyond. So with those criteria, we talked about improving, again, interoperability. There was a lot of, I had a few conversations offline about this, obviously through discovering and clustering content, standardization of templates and ontologies. And then when we start to move from registering and working with the best practice system to trying to move towards convergence or endorsement, we then ask the question, how do you use the system to capture the pulse of the global discussion so that we can actually inform everybody? So you're turning it from essentially from data into information, if you will. And there was a number of decisions around this. The decision tree idea, where we talked about what the definitions were, and then pilot projects may be the right way forward here. There's a discussion about how we might use the sargassum example for policy making, and then also is creating a decision tree around a particular best practice sort of working organically towards an endorsement. An endorsement is a sort of an emergent property of a decision tree process. And then if you look at the, there was a lot of discussion about how convergent and endorsement works. Do we want endorsement? Is endorsement kind of a red herring? To me, to be honest, it seems like what we really want is absolutely the most active community engagement that we can have so that we're constantly updating ourselves. And the danger, of course, in going down the specific or formal endorsement path is that one thing can be ossified. And that's exactly what the Ocean Best Practice system wants to get away from. So if we maximize engagement and we maximize interoperability, then that endorsement will maybe come more as an emergent property of the system. A lot of discussion about education and training. Of course, Ocean OBPS isn't going to resource that directly, but making a space for online videos and podcasts. And there was a discussions of mentoring and coaching, which I thought was great, because that means that people who know something and want other people to learn about it can volunteer to mentor and to coach others. And then community outreach seems like in a very, very broad, but again, what kind of resources do we have for this? We do need to link with the UN decade, and the question would be for us is what OBP activities actually align with the decade. And finally, there was this thread of ethics. And there were some conversations in our chat room around ethics perhaps being a slightly dangerous word to use because it can be seen as a bit subjective. And do we really want to be thinking more about best practice in science and stakeholder engagement rather than ethics per se? So that's what I sketched out from our last conversation. And I would like to open the floor. Please comment, criticize, or add to this.
I think you've done an excellent job. And at first glance, I think we're done.
I have a question, Anya, and maybe Mark also. So these are, in my mind, it's hard to separate one or from the other from these. I don't see these as ranked, but they're together, right? If you cannot have interoperability without endorsement, you cannot have convergence without interoperability, and vice versa. And you cannot advance these without training and outreach. So they're all kind of, how do you move all of this together at the same time?
Great question.
And it's a question for the steering group, I think, who will take a look at these and say, what can we do?
Yeah.
Of course, there's a bind. Oops, sorry. Please go ahead.
No, go ahead. No, Johannes, go ahead.
I think there's a binding element, of course, which is best practices. There's no doubt about that. But you can still prioritize things, even if they are interlinked. There's a prioritization possible, and hopefully we do not need to do that. But I think still you can do that. That might be something we can. I just prepared actually the voting for it, even if it's because of the linkage is not possible. But I post voting now. Just did that in the chat, and you can, while you think about it, vote and see what you think is more like the
Yeah, may I say something? I'm just very surprised that the ethics is not considered as per se, because it's like values, core values that we all share as human and as scientists, and to minimize this as scientific and stakeholder engagement, it's one part, but I think it goes beyond. And I mean, if it's the feeling of the community, then I will just stop communicating. But really,
I don't think it's that, Michelle. I think that ethics permeates everything. It's a completely cross-cutting issue. It's not that it's being, that's why I did not want to rank these, although I just voted. But I think they're all together, and ethics is in each one of them. There's no separation of ethics.
Right.
It's not a separate thing.
And the challenge also comes from, it's not that it's just hard to think, it's unusual for a lot of the stakeholder groups to consider it in a principled way. Everyone has their own personal ethics. There are professional ethics, institutional ethics. But when you're actually acting, let's say within the decade or within your own scientific or application mission, how those all come together, sometimes there are no guidelines, there are no precedents. And it's a tricky thing to do. It's a very sensitive thing to approach. And that's where we need those guidelines from communities that have faced this before. It's quite tricky. It's just that we don't know how to handle it properly yet.
Yes, but I think it's the responsibility of everyone to apply some core values and best practice. To me, ethics will provide recommendation because it's all depend on the context. I'm sorry to always go back to this, but every time I had to face ethical issues in the European Commission proposal I was evaluating, it's always a case-by-case studies. And this is why I really think an ethics committee at the UN level or IOC or I don't know where, dedicated to ocean sciences and specifically to ocean observation would be very helpful, because sometimes you have some tricky questions, and even though you have the best practice for collaborating, for engaging stakeholders, fishers, or to, there is always one tricky point, and only a group of different people with different expertise from the philosophy, the science, the I don't know, the legal aspect can help in getting the best decision in this context.
I mean, I totally agree that these are difficult and deep conversations that we have to have across the community. I'll just give you one example, though, where I thought I had the correct ethics when I was learning about fair data. And then when I moved to Canada and realized that I needed to engage with communities of Indigenous stakeholders. And then suddenly we have principles of OCAP, which are ownership, control, access, and possession, the exact opposite of FAIR principles. And so, you know, when I first reacted, my first reaction was a little bit kind of a frisson of, well, what are you thinking, you know? I mean, and almost the same as an oil company, you know, I want to own and control the data. And then when you go deeper into the conversation, you realize, no, this is a deeply moral conversation and ethical. And so that's why I'm thinking, if we, that was my wording, so please forgive me if I didn't mean to at all denigrate this topic, but to me, best practice in scientific and stakeholder engagement is a profound philosophical conversation to have. This is not at all superficial, because there I was thinking, well, I'm, a champion of fair data, and then I realized that fair data in some cases strips indigenous peoples of their culture. So there are no obvious answers here, but to me, best practice in scientific and stakeholder engagement asks us to ask ethical questions without saying I have the answer or this is the ethical correct ethic. I want to get away from this is ethically correct, because it seems fraught.
Yeah, no, I fully agree, and in fact, it's all about respecting people and culture and differences. And it's really important that scientists and ocean observers are responsible. They know what they are doing, in which objective, and with who, and for what. And it's really important just to remind people your responsibility as scientists. That's.
Can I ask a question? Would it be, I'm trying to link the ethics issue with the ocean best practices. Now, if an ocean best practice is being submitted, would it be useful to have some sort of a checklist whereby you then check if the proposed practice is adhering to basic ethics principles?
Yes, so that's why I designed in this flow chart. It's like starting from asking question, are you collaborating with indigenous groups, Are you sharing, or are you, where the data are coming from? Are you working with third countries where you need some benefit sharing arrangement? Are you doing some experiment with animals? So this is this checklist that could be implemented right when you submit a best practice. You could have these pop-up windows coming up, and then you tick, and then, okay, and then I should add one sentence about ethical recommendation on the process in this context. Because when you are working with indigenous communities, you need to be aware of the OCAP principles. We just opened the floor for negotiation. So this is really, and I really encourage everyone, and I don't know how to share this flow chart to have everyone wording and concern and question.
So Michelle, that's a really good point. I just wanted to go to Pierre because he and I have discussed this specific issue in detail, and he has some interesting comments in this area.
There are a number of comments on the data side, of course, but also in the broader sense. So to respond to Michelle's last point, I think that can be something the OBPS can help develop. Again, we can't put forward ethical recommendations, but we can facilitate groups such as those that you're connected with, compiling those, and then thinking about how our technology can expose those checklists to people submitting or developing new methods or standard specifications. For example, if they mention certain place names where there are indigenous communities living, that would automatically suggest certain checklists for them to see. Then on the broader point of like the FAIR principles, indeed, FAIR does not mean that it's completely open. It's great if the data is open, but your data can be fair without being completely open. It can be behind some sort of access control, and that's okay. But what we also ask is that metadata about the fact that it exists is released to the community. Because if people don't know that it exists, they won't know that somebody is there to talk to, that you should check with somebody about working in a certain region. So there's a question there, and also we try to engage with the CARE principles community a bit late, so unfortunately we didn't get a speaker from there, but that's something we need to really understand more, especially on the implementation side. How do we actually implement OCAP and CARE in operational systems? That's still an open question for me, and I would really appreciate guidance on it.
And
Yeah,
this is also,
sorry, Michelle, I'll go back to you in a sec. Just as a comment, for example, we have just developed the first Indigenous engagement guide for Atlantic Canadian Ocean research, and we're going to be lodging that hopefully within a month on the OBPS system. And so that should I'm hoping what that'll mean is that other people will say, oh, look, this exists. Let's put ours up there. Or, oh, we don't have one. We'd better have one, because otherwise the only one existing in the system will be from Atlantic Canada. And yeah, Michelle just shared the Ocean OBS statement, which was fabulous. So there's the Indigenous statement from Ocean OBS last year is a really powerful one.
Yes, I think an Ocean OBS statement can also give some kind of, this is the rules. You want to play the game, then you have to agree or endorse this kind of statement. And I think it's up to the community to build it. So I just drafted, it's like every time I draft things, and I just welcome the community to build on.
Thank you so much, Michelle. A really important point. Ben, I'm wondering if we have any outputs from the poll that we're now not really saying is going to be a poll, but it would be interesting to see what the outcome was, nevertheless, see what people
Johannes, that's your department. Unmute you, or you can unmute yourself.
The 3 important recommendations I share with you now, I hope.
Yeah. Maximize that one window. Yeah.
Yep. Okay. So here you should see it. Ethics was actually ranked 3 before we started talking about it. No, it was also early. Yeah, everything is quite interlinked that we can see, and it's really difficult to prioritize here, I think. I mean, as Anya warned us when she brought up that points, of course. So I wouldn't take that, wouldn't take this ranking here too serious. Yeah.
Christian, I think you wanted to say something?
Oh, yes, just in terms of this prioritization, well, I guess that right now we have the big ideas or the big recommendations in a very, let's say, high level, but fortunately right now we have a quite good comprehensive structure in the Ocean Best Practices system, where we have some work packages. So I guess that mostly all of these high-level recommendations can be prioritized in specific actions in the short and mid-term strategic plan, and just try to align these specific efforts together for following a kind of agile methodology, something like that, that we can just work together, but in little objectives for specific actions that would be derived from these priorities. Maybe this ethics is something, I wouldn't say new, but I guess it's a quite new concept introduced in OBPS this year. Probably, it's very well said that it's a transversal issue. Probably it's a matter of seeing how to allocate this in the system. But I guess that after digesting this in the steering group, I'm pretty much sure that we might be able to prioritize specific actions and considering all these 6 major topics.
So thank you very much for that. What I'll do, I'm aware of time. I just want to say thank you very much to everyone who's contributed to this and for the great discussion. And I'm going to hand it over now back to our hosts, who are going to finish the final wrap up.
Yes, thank you, Anya. So I will share again here my screen with only one slide actually. So first of all, I would like to thank all of you for this really interesting second panel here. I think we came quite far, and we have really a set of recommendations that are surprisingly in their grand themes, so to say, not different from what we have. And as Christian just pointed out, from what we have already well established in the structure of the Ocean Best Practices system steering group and the work packages that come along with it. So the next steps, of course, we have to take in order to really materialize what we came up here is to consolidate further the recommendations we get from the working groups, but also from the second panel, I think. Then we have to think about the ways we can facilitate as ocean best practices system the continuation of the working groups. It looks really to me like there's a lot, for example, the idea with the decision tree is really an expression, I think, for the will to collaborate on common goals, on really making things, as we said it before, interoperable. And so we need to find ways in doing that. We have to review the workshop in the final meeting. We will do that next Wednesday. And then we will come up with some strategies, and we may also tell you more about our implementation ideas for the next OBPS project phase. And then, of course, these recommendations will be transferred, as Christian also just pointed out, to the different working groups in the steering team. And we will have a meeting in October to sort that all out. And then, of course, I would like to acknowledge specifically here all those which contributed to that meeting, as I said it already from the beginning, but also in particular our ECOPS, early career ocean practitioners, and Ben and Nenad for their really great job they did in organizing this whole thing, and also really, really great. Did such a nice and very, yeah, it was a very refreshing exercise. Yeah, and in particular also I would like to thank again all the working group leads that really did a great job in organizing their sessions. I mean, these were really very individual organized working groups, and you did it all under this umbrella of the Ocean Best Practices system, and we are deeply thankful to you that you did that, and you made this meeting a real success. And I think we are all happy that we can now go out of the meeting with a lot of new ideas and new tasks actually that we can work up. So thanks to all of you, and have a good Friday evening, morning, night, whatever. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Thank
Thank you. It
you.
was a pleasure.
Yes, it was a pleasure. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye-bye.